Chapter 821. Klein's strength was far above Homelin's. Not long after, the frost dragons that Homelin had summoned were all annihilated by the other party. Klein was the only one left, barely holding on with Death Guard. Haha, surrender. There's no way out of resisting. Klein already had victory in his hands, and began to persuade the other party to surrender. As long as you declare your loyalty to the Red Silk Army, Lord Utaris will be magnanimous and will not pursue your actions of resistance. Impossible. Homelin didn't even think about it, and flatly refused. He coldly said, "We undead are only loyal to the Lich King of the Scourge Army, Lord Hermes. We definitely won't be loyal to that Utaris." Lich King? Hermes? Klein immediately sneered when he heard this. That guy seems to have been dead for a long time. I didn't expect you to still be loyal to a dead person. Homelin said, "O powerful divine magus of the undead. You come from a noble bloodline of the powerful undead, but you led an army to attack the Scourge Church. This action is tantamount to betraying the undead." Homelin paused, and a trace of sternness flashed in his eyes. He loudly shouted, "The only outcome for you is death in body and soul." Death in body and soul was the greatest curse for the undead. For the undead, the death of the body wasn't true death, as long as the soul was still present. However, the death of the soul was the true calamity for the undead. Are you seeking death? Sure enough, after hearing these words, Klein's body suddenly trembled, and his face became completely gloomy. He then laughed coldly. "That's right. I betrayed the undead. But so what? The undead of the mortal plane no longer have any hope. I, Klein, am a powerful expert of the divine realm. How can I fall together with the decaying undead?" "What did you say? You said that the undead of the mortal plane have perished?" Homelin's hands trembled, and a trace of astonishment flashed in his eyes. Hearing Klein's tone, it seemed that the undead of the mortal plane had already perished. Homelin, who studied under the Lich King Hermes, had heard the Lich King talk about the mortal plane. At that time, the Scourge Army was like the sun in the sky in the mortal plane, and all forces were somewhat afraid of them. But now, that's not it, but it's about it. At the very least, the Scourge Army that once feared will never return. Klein sneered, and continued. Even if Hermes is still alive, there's nothing he can do about the undead's current situation. Lord is. He was born, he had the strength of the divine sky, and possessed the power strength the moment he was born. Divine sky was the divine sky were from the moment he was born. Klein paused, and a slight smile appeared on his face. One day, his glory will spread across the entire main continent, and all the gods will crawl at his feet. As for Hermes, this guy isn't even fit to carry Lord Utaris' shoes. Shut up. You are not allowed to insult Lord Hermes. Hearing Klein insult Homelin, Homelin could not hold himself back. He was so agitated that his face flushed red, and his body trembled with anger. Homelin wouldn't have minded if it had been someone else, but Hermes was a necromancer, which was something that Homelin couldn't tolerate. Homelin swore in his heart that he would tear this guy to shreds, provided that he had the strength to do so. Klein sneered. "I don't think you'll give in so easily. In that case, I'll let you see Lord Utaris' power." Klein sneered again and again. At this time, a pair of pale, white left hands slowly stretched out from under the wide robe, emitting a demonic luster. Not long after, a faintly discernible, colorless, translucent hair-like thing appeared in his palm. Strangely enough, after Klein took out this little thing, the wind and clouds changed color, and the surrounding space was also attracted by this little hair-like thing and began to fluctuate. What? This is divine power. Homelin was shocked. What else could it be but divine power to have such great power? Before he could react, Klein made his move. Spatial Blade. In order to establish his prestige in front of everyone, Klein no longer held back. He used the divine power of space that Utaris had given him. The powerful divine power of space directly blasted through the void, turning into an earth-shattering huge saber that attacked Homelin. Death Guard. Homelin clenched his teeth and immediately used his strongest resistance. But how could a mortal resist the power of a god? Under the formidable power of the spatial blade, Homelin's Death Guard melted like snow in spring, and the frost dragon he summoned also turned into a cloud of smoke and disappeared. "Not good, Great Elder!" Vivian cried out in alarm. In the sky, Homelin violently spat out a mouthful of blood, and his withered figure continued to fall. The might of divine power caused the space to fluctuate, like broken fragments fluttering in the wind. On the ground, dust rose into the air, covering the sky and the sun. "You're finished." Klein's lips curled into a sinister smile, and in an instant, the spatial blade slashed down with oppressive power. His target was surprisingly Kay. Boom! A strong golden light appeared on Kay's body, forming a huge golden protective barrier. This was Kay's full power, resisting the attack from the sky. Under the effect of the powerful divine power of space, Kay's defensive barrier was shattered. Immediately after, she let out a blood-curdling scream as her steel-like right arm was completely cut off by the spatial blade. In just a short moment, two of the Scourge Church's powerhouses had been defeated. The situation had changed so quickly that everyone was dumbfounded. Then, a sense of helplessness overwhelmed them. The power of a god was just too strong. "We're finished." Juliana sighed helplessly, knowing that resistance was futile. "There's no other way. Let's surrender. It's all over." Vivian closed her eyes in despair, large drops of tears rolling down her delicate cheeks. The fierce battle had finally come to an end, and night fell. In the face of the powerful divine power, the Scourge Church had no choice but to surrender. In the Undercity, the heavy city gates slowly opened. What happened after the surrender was simple. Klein did not let the Red Silk Army's magical beasts go on a killing spree. Instead, he imprisoned all of them and locked them in prison. With the Scourge Church's complete destruction, the Red Silk Army took over the entire Noah continent. From then on, there was no resistance. In the Undercity at night, a cool breeze blew. On the top of the city's tallest tower, a white flag fluttered in the wind, looking very dazzling. The frightened people stared at the invaders, their eyes filled with fear and unease. "Your subordinate is incompetent. Please punish me, master." In the Undercity's Hall of the Dead, the tall Apps knelt on one knee in front of Klein, his face full of shame. Although they had won the battle today, the process was not complimentary. If not for Klein's personal intervention, they would have lost miserably. Klein stood in front of the large balcony with his hands behind his back. Apps could not see his face clearly and felt uneasy. Today's matter was indeed a big mistake, but now is not the time to hold you accountable. After a long while, Klein slowly opened his mouth. "Because we have more important things to do." App's head lowered even more. "Please instruct me, master. We're looking for someone." Klein turned around, his slightly narrowed eyes flashing with a cold light. "Noah's maid, a woman called Mary. Although I don't know where she is, I'm sure she must still be on this continent." Klein said in an unquestionable tone. "This person is very important to Lord Eudelise. Apps, I want you to find her no matter the cost, even if you have to dig 3 feet into the ground." Chapter 822. A long counter extended all the way to the wall. Sunlight seeped through the dusty corner, and a cat with black and white fur was lazily curled up on the table. This was a small tavern in the Scourge Church's Undercity. The owners of this tavern were a mother and daughter pair. The mother was called Magus, and she had a cute daughter named Kristen. In a few months, Kristen would be 17 years old. She was very beautiful, and although she wasn't an adult yet, she had a beautiful appearance and a well-developed body that didn't lose out to an adult's. She had many suitors, and in order to meet Kristen, many young people didn't hesitate to come from another district of Undercity just to drink a cup of ale. Magus and her daughter had already stayed in Undercity for 5 years. To the mother and daughter, Undercity was a very kind and lively place. Although compared to other cities, the atmosphere here was more gloomy and depressing, but business wasn't bad. At least it was like this before. However, the reason why Madame Magus took a fancy to Undercity and operated here for 5 years was that no matter how powerful the mercenaries were, they would all behave themselves when they came to Undercity. No one dared to make trouble here. The huge statue of Ron in the main square of the Scourge Church was the guarantee of everything. But all of this was destroyed by the arrival of the Red Silk Army. Ever since the Red Silk Army defeated the Scourge Church and took over, Madame Magus Tavern's business plummeted. Even her daughter's beautiful appearance couldn't make the tavern's business much better. These days, Madame Magus' eyebrows were covered with a thin layer of fog. If the business continued like this, she was afraid that the tavern would close down. It had already been 3 months since the arrival of the Red Silk Army. With the defeat of the Scourge Church as a symbol, the Red Silk Army could be considered to have conquered the Noah continent. The Noah continent also lost its original name with the passing of Noah. Now, all the creatures in the Noah continent only needed to remember one name: the great leader of the Red Silk Army, the super divine beast sky dragon Utaris from the main plane. No one had seen Utaris before, but it didn't prevent the people of the Noah continent from recognizing their new leader at a glance. In every large city square, there were huge statues of the sky dragon that were hundreds of meters tall, reaching the clouds, bearing fangs, and brandishing claws. Of course, Undercity was no exception. In the current Noah continent, under the high pressure of the Red Silk Army, there was no longer any distinction between countries, regions, groups, or races. The original kings and nobles were driven out of the palaces and mansions. Some of the powerful mercenaries and the high and mighty experts of the sacred domain were all demoted to commoners. To be exact, they were slaves. These slaves were all required to wear the symbol of the Red Silk Army, a piece of red silk wrapped around their arms, or worn on their head, or a badge with the word swastika engraved on it. If someone was found not wearing these things, they would meet misfortune. They would be mercilessly killed by the pickets of the Red Silk Army. These pickets that were sent to various places were all experts of the sacred domain and above. The captain of the pickets was even a magical beast from the sacred domain. Under the cruel iron fist of the Red Silk Army, the entire Noah continent was like a huge prison. All the living beings were suffering in this terrifying prison. Kristen was lying on the table in the tavern, staring at a painting on the wall in a daze. She had milky-colored curly hair, 2 big brown eyes brimming with youthful vigor, and a black and white dress wrapped around her graceful figure. On her sleeveless arm, there was a red strip of cloth that was dazzling. The tavern wasn't big, but there were only 3 or 4 customers, so it seemed a little cold and cheerless. Most of them were silently drinking and eating meat. Even when they spoke, they deliberately lowered their voices, as if they were afraid of being heard by others. The atmosphere was a little dull, a sharp contrast to the lively scene in the past. Kristen had been staring at the painting on the wall for a long time. It was a portrait of an old human woman. To Kristen, there was nothing special about it. However, she knew that this human woman was very important to the Red Silk Army. Because of this, the Red Silk Army had already come to the tavern 3 times. Each time, they repeated the same words, that if they found the woman in the painting, they must report to her. Who is she? Why is the Red Silk Army looking for her? Kristen didn't know the woman in the painting. She only knew that she was called Mary. Kristen was silently thinking, so deep in thought that she didn't even hear her mother call her name. Kristen, what are you thinking about? Kristen's mother, Madame Magus, lightly patted her, startling Kristen and causing her to come back to her senses. Kristen, hurry up and greet the guests. I don't know what you're thinking. Really? You didn't even hear the guests coming in? Madame Magus muttered. Because business wasn't good recently, her tone was a little harsh. Usually, Madame Magus wasn't like this, smiling at everyone she met. Oh, I'm sorry, Mother. I'll go now. Kristen stood up in a panic. She tidied up her hair and quickly went to greet the guests. The person who came in was a human man wearing a black robe. His skin was pale with a hint of green. His stooped body seemed a little thin and weak. After a long journey, he seemed a little tired. He took off his hood, revealing a delicate and handsome face. However, his young face was covered with a beard that didn't match his age. From the way he dressed, he was a young necromancer. If it was in the past, this profession would definitely be a big shot. Kristen's eyes lit up, and a professional smile appeared on her pretty face. "Please have a seat, respected necromancer. What would you like to order?" "Hello." The necromancer who came in faintly nodded. He turned his head to look around and frowned slightly. He turned around and sat down. He looked at Kristen and said in a hoarse voice, "Give me a cup of ale and then bring up whatever food you have." As he said that, the necromancer's hand shook and dozens of gold coins fell out of his sleeve like beans. Kristen's eyes widened. The gold coins were equivalent to a month's worth of income for the tavern. Even in the past, they would definitely be rich customers. Only a mercenary with a large bounty would be able to afford such a large sum of money. "All right, necromancer, please wait a moment." The smile on Kristen's face bloomed like a flower. Her hands quickly danced on the table and collected the dozens of gold coins in an instant. One couldn't help but admire her professionalism. Attracted by the sound of the gold coins falling on the table, the customers in the tavern turned their heads and looked at the uninvited guest in front of them with a trace of vigilance. Their expressions changed at the same time, and then they lowered their heads and didn't say anything. "Mom, look, we're rich." Kristen quickly ran back to the counter, her beautiful face filled with excitement. "Look, 53 gold coins, a total of 53 gold coins. That's great." Madame Agus's face was also filled with excitement. Now we don't have to close the door. With money, the tavern could continue to operate. This tavern was the source of income for the mother and daughter. Kristen playfully stuck out her tongue and smiled. Then the two of them got busy. "Mom, do you think this guy is a mercenary?" Kristen poured the ale from the barrel into a cup, causing a large amount of white foam to appear. "He should be. We haven't met such a forthright customer in a long time." Madame Magus put on her work clothes and quickly cut a portion of beef with the knife in her hand. Then she placed it on the red-hot iron plate on the counter. After a while, the beef began to sizzle and emit a fragrant aroma. Kristen quickly prepared the cup of ale and placed it on a tray. Just as she was about to serve it to the guest, her footsteps stopped abruptly. Her eyes opened wide, revealing a look of intense surprise. "What's wrong, Kristen? Why aren't you bringing the ale to the honorable customer?" Madame Magus saw that Kristen was standing still and hurriedly urged her. Mom, look, that customer. Isn't he a little strange?" Kristen opened her eyes wide and stuttered. "Strange." Madame Magus casually raised her head to take a look and then shook her head. "No, there's nothing wrong." But he doesn't have an armband. He also doesn't have any symbol of the Red Silk Army." Kristen whispered to her mother. Her voice was trembling and her face was filled with fear. "What?" Madame Magus jumped in fright and started to panic. "Maybe he forgot to bring it when he went out. Should we remind him?" Kristen swallowed her saliva with difficulty and said, "It's too late." Madame Magus sighed. "Did you see that customer on the other table? He just ran out. There's an 80% chance that he went to the public order squad to inform them. If the public order squad comes, there's an 80% chance that this fellow won't be able to live." Madame Magus waved her hand weakly. "It's better to remind him. If he's not careful, he might even implicate us." "Yes, Mom," Kristen replied, and quickly walked towards the necromancer. The necromancer had been sitting on his seat and was staring blankly in front of him. Seeing Kristen walk over, he faintly nodded his head. Without waiting for her to open the door, he took the initiative to ask, "What's wrong with this person?" Kristen was stunned for a moment. Only then did she realize that the necromancer was referring to the portrait of Mary. This. When she met the necromancer's gaze, a trace of panic appeared on Kristen's face. She felt that this face was very familiar, as if she had seen it somewhere before, but she couldn't put her finger on it. This is a human girl called Mary. The Red Silk Army is looking for her. Kristen answered honestly. Hearing the name of the Red Silk Army, the necromancer's gaze turned cold. "Why is the Red Silk Army looking for her? Why? This? I don't know." Kristen smiled awkwardly. She glanced at the necromancer and couldn't help but say, "This esteemed guest. It's like this. I think, when you went out, Did you forget to bring something? I mean, you should remember, but you might have forgotten. It's that armlet. Kristen stuttered. She secretly blamed herself. She was usually very eloquent, but now she couldn't even speak properly. The armlet of the Red Silk Army? The necromancer frowned, a trace of disgust flashing through his eyes. I've never worn this thing. What? Kristen was truly frightened this time. If he had forgotten to wear it when he went out, then so be it. But if he directly refused to wear it, then what did that mean? It meant that he was openly provoking the Red Silk Army. Esteemed guest, you can't do this. If the Red Silk Army's pickets find out, you will die. Kristen became anxious, beads of sweat appearing on her forehead. I've already said, the necromancer's tone was firm. I will never wear this thing. Kristen wanted to persuade him again, but at this moment, a flurry of footsteps came from outside the tavern. She already understood that the pickets had arrived. Chapter 823 F***CK. Which idiot dares to ignore the orders of the Red Silk Army? Following a clamor, Madame Magus Tavern's door was knocked open by someone with a bang. Immediately after, dozens of people rushed in. In a moment, this deserted little tavern became very lively. The leader was a burly man with a height of nearly 2 meters. His name was Dunkirk. This guy was wearing a simple leather armor, and his muscles were bulging. His small eyes were like mung beans, emitting an ominous glint. That's right, he was a barbarian. The barbarian tribe was located between the humans and the beastmen in the Noah continent. It was only a small tribe with a small population. Including the old, weak, women, and children, there were only a few million of them. Because of their small population, the barbarian tribe didn't discriminate between men and women. They were good at fighting and powerful, although they belonged to the human race. In terms of cultivation, they leaned towards the beastmen's power. Therefore, these barbarians were all muscular people. Not only that, the barbarians were proficient in all kinds of weapons, especially throwing weapons such as hand axes, javelins, and so on. On the battlefield, this was a force that couldn't be ignored. When the Red Silk Army arrived in the Noah continent, the barbarian tribe was the first to surrender to the Red Silk Army, and even worked for them. This action surprised many people. Of course, there were great benefits to surrendering to the Red Silk Army. Especially when the Red Silk Army was at its peak, Dunkirk was only a small tribal chief of the barbarian tribe. It didn't take him much effort to become a picket captain. Moreover, with the help of the Red Silk Army, his strength directly broke through to the sacred domain from the High Master rank. He became a sacred domain powerhouse that everyone dreamed of. Dunkirk had a deep understanding of the power of the Red Silk Army. For this reason, he was even more willing to work for the army. In name, the picket team monitored, inspected, and regulated people wearing armbands and the Red Silk Army's logo. But in reality, the picket team had a lot of power. They could directly arrest people without trial, throw them into the dark prison, and slowly torture them. Even if they died in the prison, no one would know. In short, the Sentinel Squad was an organization that made one's face change color. The dark prison was a sinister and terrifying existence. Basically, in Undercity, as long as Dunkirk roared, even most law-abiding people would be scared witless. But now, Dunkirk was a little surprised that the man in the necromancer's attire, without any Red Silk Army insignia, was sitting there eating freshly prepared beef and sipping ale calmly as though he didn't care about them at all. "Sir, it's him." Someone pointed at the table. Needless to say, it was the man who ran out to snitch. At this moment, he had a flattering smile on his face as he stared at Dunkirk expectantly. At the same time, he glanced at the necromancer with a gloating look. Lord Dunkirk. Megis had no choice but to run out and salute Dunkirk. Kristen, on the other hand, glared fiercely at the informant, her eyes full of contempt. At this moment, the few customers in the tavern had all left. Only Magus and her daughter, the pickets, and the young man without any insignia were left. "Yo, not bad." Dunkirk laughed. "I heard someone report that someone was strolling around the streets without an armband in broad daylight, and even entered the tavern to drink. To be honest, I didn't quite believe it. Now, there's actually someone who has the guts to disobey the orders of the Red Silk Army. He nodded lightly and sneered. Necromancer? Ha! Necromancer. At this moment, Dunkirk narrowed his eyes. In an instant, the pickets' hearts shrank. This was the signal that Dunkirk was going to kill someone. Who the F***CK do you think you are? While speaking, Dunkirk suddenly lifted his leg and kicked the table next to him. The poor table hit the wall with a bang and broke into pieces. This display of power made the originally tense atmosphere in the tavern drop to the freezing point. Murderous intent overflowed, causing Madame Magus and Kristen to tremble in fear. However, the guy in the necromancer's attire wasn't affected at all. He continued to eat as though no one was around, and would occasionally take a sip of the fragrant ale as though they were air. At this moment, he raised his head, glanced at Dunkirk, and uttered a word softly. Scram! What? Not only Dunkirk and his pickets, but even Magus and her daughter were stunned. They could not believe their ears. Everyone had an absurd thought in their minds. If this guy was not courting death, then he was definitely a lunatic. No one dared to challenge the authority of the pickets, not even a divine powerhouse, because they were backed by the Crimson Silk Army. Perhaps a divine powerhouse could easily kill Dunkirk, but he would definitely be hunted down by the many divine powerhouses of the Crimson Silk Army. Under the iron fist of the Crimson Silk Army, it was impossible for there to be a powerhouse who did not listen to orders and could not be controlled. Divine powerhouses were no exception. Dunkirk was stunned for more than 10 seconds, standing there like a fool. With his barbarian wisdom, he did not know how to deal with this matter. The reason was simple. There was no precedent. In the Noah continent, no one dared to say no to the Crimson Silk Army ever since the Scourge Church was destroyed. However, Dunkirk did not think that the young man in front of him was a divine powerhouse. The reason was simple. He was too young. Ha! Dunkirk, who had recovered from his shock, laughed loudly. Good, very good. This is the first time I've met someone like you. Interesting. I wanted to use your flesh and blood to wash my steel axe, but now that I think about it, such a way of dying is too easy for you. Dunkirk coldly stared at the necromancer, the smile on his face cruel and ferocious. I think you should be arrested and thrown into the pickets dungeon. You should go through all 80 kinds of torture. Don't worry, we have professional executioners who can guarantee your life and enjoy the whole process. Hearing this, Kristen lamented in her heart. This guy is definitely dead. No one who enters the dungeon can come out alive, regardless of whether they are guilty or not. Magus was extremely nervous. She was afraid that this matter would implicate her. After all, the necromancer was caught in her tavern. She was already calculating how many gold coins she would need to satisfy Dunkirk's appetite. The strange thing was that the young necromancer was still sitting there without moving. His elegant fingers held the knife and fork and danced on the plate of beef in front of him. The cooked beef covered in sauce was put into his mouth piece by piece. Arrest him for me. Dunkirk straightened his clothes and shouted with a straight face. He could almost hear the callous shouts of his team members and the young man's unwillingness to give up. In the end, he was caught and thrown into the dark prison. He could even hear the sound of torture instruments torturing his body and the pitiful young man's cries and begging for mercy. For a long time, no one moved. The tavern was so quiet that even a needle dropping to the ground could be heard. Only the sound of the knife and fork in the necromancer's hands could be heard. What Dunkirk thought did not happen at all. You bunch of idiots. Are you deaf? I told you to arrest this guy. Dunkirk was enraged and roared at the pickets. Still no movement. At this time, Dunkirk suddenly felt that something was wrong. Cold sweat flowed down his forehead. He turned around and looked. The subordinates he had brought with him were all standing there with their mouths wide open, dumbfounded. They were motionless and had long lost all signs of life. Bang! 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 Dozens of bodies fell at the same time. The pickets, without any signs of life, were just corpses. What? Dunkirk was truly shocked this time. Just a moment ago, 20 to 30 men he brought with him had silently lost their lives. All of this was like magic. How'd he do it? This necromancer, Who was he? Dunkirk's fingers trembled, and his heart was filled with fear. He had too many questions in his mind. He did not know the identity of the other party, nor did he know the strength of the other party, but he was sure of one thing. The young man in front of him, who was calmly eating beef and drinking ale, was far stronger than him. Could it be he was a divine powerhouse? At this thought, Dunkirk's heart trembled fiercely, and his mind became completely clear. Go! Out of instinct, Dunkirk screamed and dashed out of the door like a wounded beast. Bang! A loud sound rang out. Without any warning, Dunkirk's head exploded like a watermelon, and blood mixed with brain matter splattered on the tavern's door. Dunkirk was dead. It turned out to be so simple to take a person's life. Of course, this was only for the black-robed young man who was sitting upright. He did not even move from his chair. Whoa! Magus and Christine were so scared that they hugged each other tightly. Their bodies were trembling, and their faces were as pale as paper. Everything had changed too quickly. The guy who was clearly the prey just a moment ago had become the hunter in the blink of an eye. Although they did not know what had happened, everything in front of them was obvious. Who would have thought that this young man in a necromancer's robe was actually hiding such powerful strength? The indifferent young man was still sitting there, as if everything that had happened here had nothing to do with him. He unhurriedly finished the beef in front of him, put down the knife and fork, and drank the ale. He took out a white handkerchief and gently wiped his lips before putting it back. At this time, he slowly stood up and walked in front of Magus and the mother and daughter. Don't hurt my daughter, in front of this terrifyingly powerful young man. Magus tried her best to remain calm. In fact, she was extremely terrified, and her voice was trembling slightly. Christine was tightly held in her mother's arms. At this moment, she finally saw the terrifying young man's face clearly. It was an ordinary face without any special features. However, this face gave Christine a very familiar feeling. She tried to recall where she had seen this face before. Finally, a light flashed in Christine's mind. The young man's face in front of her completely overlapped with the face in the square of Gloom City. It's him. Christine was stunned. That was a name that resounded throughout the entire Noah continent. The young man smiled. He reached out his left hand and gently stroked Kristen's hair. He pinched her little face and said softly to Magus, "Don't worry. The beef here is not bad, but the ale is a little weak." After saying that, the young man smiled and strode out without looking back. They were saved. Madame Magus heaved a sigh of relief. However, the daughter in her arms screamed, "Ron, you're on." Christine suddenly broke free from Madame Magus's arms and rushed out of the door like an arrow. However, at this moment, that young man's shadow was nowhere to be seen. Lord Ron, he's finally back. Christine's heart was warm. After living in Gloom City for so many years, she knew what Ron's arrival meant. At this moment, her heart was once again rekindled with hope. Ron was back. Chapter 8:24. Ron slowly walked through the empty streets of Undercity, feeling lost. Ron stayed in the land of exile for half a year. During this time, he wanted to come back all the time, but at that time, the Noah continent was wrapped in a powerful, invisible spatial force that isolated the entire Noah continent from the other major planes. Ron could not enter at all. Ron was so anxious that he almost went crazy. The psychic bracelet that Noah gave him had always been normal, which made him feel relieved. Finally, when Ron broke through the spatial barrier formed by the powerful force, half a year had passed. In this half a year, the Noah continent had undergone earth-shaking changes. Ron walked on the streets of Undercity, almost unable to recognize the city that he had always lived in. It had become oppressive and closed. On the surface, it seemed nothing, but in fact, it was chaotic and disorderly. Not only Undercity, but almost every city in the Noah continent was like this. The Noah continent had no country, no organization, no power. Even mercenaries no longer accepted missions. The whole continent was like a pool of stagnant water. People's calm faces revealed fanaticism. Everyone was like slaves. They only had one goal, and that was to be loyal to the Sky Dragon Utaris. However, What worried Ron more was the whereabouts of his family. Aurora, Delin, Becerra, Cadena, and his newborn daughter, Isis, and his mentor, Homelin. These people and these things worried him, and he could not let them go. How are they? Ron sighed silently. Slowly, his eyes became firm. No matter what, food has to be eaten mouthful by mouthful, and things have to be done step by step. Ron's lips curled into a sneer. Let's start with you. With that, Ron slowly opened his right hand, and a soul that was almost transparent and filled with fear was released. It was none other than the picket captain, Dunkirk. The moment before Ron killed that guy, he changed his mind and imprisoned his soul. With Ron's current strength, killing a powerhouse of the sacred domain was as easy as killing a chicken. Don't kill me. Dunkirk's soul curled up, his eyes full of fear. At this moment, he finally knew who the person in front of him was. It was the former strongest person in the Noah continent, the divine necromancer and the young master of the Scourge Church, Ron. In the past half a year, Ron had changed a lot. His bearded face was full of vicissitudes of life. It was no wonder that Dunkirk could not recognize him at a glance. Ron's face was devoid of emotion. What happened while I was away? Don't hide it. Tell me everything. Yes. Dunkirk didn't dare to be negligent. He immediately followed Ron's instructions and told him everything he knew. He talked for half an hour, during which Ron asked a few questions, but Dunkirk didn't answer them. It was very simple. With this guy's strength and level, he couldn't access the core secrets of the Red Silk Army. However, Ron unexpectedly heard a familiar name from Dunkirk's narration. Klein. What's going on? Isn't that guy dead? Ron's heart was full of doubts and puzzlement. He had seen Klein die with his own eyes, so how did that guy come back to life? Although it was unexpected, it was not the most important thing at the moment. For Ron, the most important thing was the whereabouts of his family. At this time, Ron said coldly, "You should know who I am, right?" Dunkirk nodded, indicating that he knew. "Very good. Then you should know where my family is." Ron nodded expressionlessly. The killing intent in his eyes gradually condensed. "You'd better cooperate. Otherwise, I'll make you regret that your soul still exists in this world." Yes. I know a little about this." Facing Ron's threat, Dunkirk swallowed hard. Since Undercity was captured by the Red Silk Army, there were still some people who stubbornly resisted. Sir Klein ordered to arrest them all and lock them in the underground dungeon of Undercity. Underground dungeon? Ron raised his eyebrows slightly and sneered. He said in a deep voice, "Very good. Where is the dungeon? Take me there." Yes, Sir Ron. This way." Dunkirk hurriedly nodded. He pretended to be submissive, but a trace of killing intent flashed across his lowered face. The dungeon mentioned by Dunkirk was located underground in the western part of Undercity. It used to be an extremely developed place, but now it had become a huge prison. In a messy underground construction site, Ron's former roommate, Fatty Kid, was struggling to move a small stone. For others, it was a very easy job, but Kid was doing it with great difficulty. He had inherited his father's genius business vision and superb business methods, but he did not inherit any power. The former finance minister of the Scourge Church, a core figure that even the powerhouses of the sacred domain desperately wanted to curry favor with, had been reduced to a state of hard labor. His business talent was not of great value to the Red Silk Army. In the past 6 months, the Red Silk Army had caught more and more dissidents. Many of them were caught because they did not wear armbands or the Red Silk Army's insignia. Some of them were caught because they spoke ill of Utaris or Klein. These people were all called dissidents by the Red Silk Army and were directly caught and locked up as hard labor. Some of them did not even do anything and were caught to work here until they died. Kid moved the stone to expand this underground dungeon, but this dungeon was used to imprison them. It had to be said that this matter was very ironic. But what could they do? The current Noah continent was a big dungeon, and the Red Silk Army's people were everywhere. Even if they escaped, where could they escape to? Damn it, this hot weather. Kid was tired of moving. He put down the stone in his hand and sat down. Huff, huff. He gasped for breath, sweat dripping down his face. Hey, who allowed you to rest? Quickly pick it up, damn it. You're tired of living, aren't you? Just as Kid was about to catch his breath, a clear voice rang out. A young man wearing black clothes and an armband walked over with a whip in his hand. Yo, and here I was wondering who it was. Isn't this Lord Kid? When this guy saw Kid, he came over with a smile that was not a smile on his face. What's up? Tired of moving and want to rest? Dingle. Kid did not answer. He looked at this guy in front of him, his eyes spitting fire. His hands gradually clenched into fists. This guy used to be his bodyguard and had the strength of a master. On the night Gloom City was breached, he suddenly rebelled and tied him up, handing him over to the Red Silk Army. However, the people Dinger had captured were not of much value to the Red Silk Army. His betrayal did not bring him much benefits, and he only became a small supervisor in the Black Prison. For this, Dinger had always been unwilling to give up and even hated Kid. Yo, Lord Kid, look at your eyes. You're not convinced, are you? When Dingle saw Kid, his old hatred and new enmity surged forth. His hand shook and a long whip stretched out. It twisted like a snake and lashed out at Kid's face. Pa! The whip lashed out at the powerless Kid, leaving bloody scars on his body. He screamed like a pig being slaughtered, and his mournful cries resounded throughout the entire underground space. The people who were working stiffly raised their heads, then quickly lowered them and continued with their work. For these imprisoned dissidents, this kind of thing was a common occurrence. Damn it, I told you to rest. Who do you think you are? Lord Kid, do you think you're the Chancellor of the Scourge Church? Haha, you're putting on airs in front of me? When I was by your side, I was a master, but you order me around like a dog. Weren't you very impressive? Ha! Where's your prestige now? Speak. Damn it. Dingle roared as he lashed out at Kid. Dinger roared as the whip in his hand landed on Jita's body. That's right, this guy was venting. He had been eyeing Jita for a long time. Now he was venting all of his dissatisfaction on Jita. He hit Jita very hard. Poor Jita was already covered in blood. It couldn't even scream. Aya, you still dare to glare at me? Do you think that your roommate, Ron, will come to save you? Haha, dream on. I'll kill you today. Dingle's eyes flashed with murderous intent, and his face became extremely ferocious. This time, he used all of his strength. At this time, the rain-like whipping stopped. Kid opened his eyes with difficulty and saw that guy called Dingle standing there in a daze. His face was as white as a sheet of paper. Dingle's whip was caught by a withered hand, and the person who caught the whip was someone he couldn't be more familiar with. Ron. This face that had been missing for a long time finally reappeared on the Noah continent. I heard that you're very dissatisfied with me. Ron stood there expressionlessly, but his heart was already filled with anger. He smiled slightly. Very well, I'll give you a chance now. A chance to attack me. Lord Ron. Thud. Dingle knelt down and slapped himself with both hands. I was wrong. I'm not human. Lord Ron. You. Don't come over. This is all a misunderstanding. Don't kill me. Dingle let out a blood-curdling scream, and his face revealed an expression of extreme pain. As his soul was sucked out, his body collapsed powerlessly. Everyone was stunned, including the supervisors of the Red Silk Army. They clearly heard the name that Dingle shouted before he died. Ron. Ron had returned. In an instant, the faces of those supervisors turned ghastly pale. You're a little late, Ron. Kid, who was lying on the ground with wounds all over his body, was panting slightly. At this moment, there was a rare smile on his face. Is it that the main character always doesn't appear until the last moment? Damn, do you think this is a novel? Sorry, my friend. Looking at the once fat guy on the ground who was now a bag of bones from hunger, Ron's face was full of apology. Chapter 825. In a spacious hall, 3 men with bear-like physiques lay naked on a comfortable, soft bed, enjoying the massage from the slender fingers of a few beautiful maids beside them. The Hall of the Dead at the center of Gloom City, which was the command post of the Scourge Church, had now been changed to the city leader's manor. Even though they had transformed into humans, they still couldn't conceal the savage and bloodthirsty aura of the magical beast from the god's domain. This caused the few human maids who were serving them to tremble with fear. They were afraid that they would accidentally anger these murderous gods and end up dead. They were the 3 battle bear brothers, earth battle bears from the divine realm. The eldest was Arnold, the second was Abel, and the third was Ashtu. They were stationed in Gloom City under Klein's orders, suppressing all resistance and protecting the rule of the Red Silk Army. As one of the main forces of the magical beast army, the 3 battle bear brothers were powerful and loyal. They had always been trusted by the leader of the magical beast army, Apps, to guard an important place like Gloom City and hold the position of city leader. Even though the Scourge Church had already been destroyed, the necromancers of the Scourge Church were the most troublesome. They appeared and disappeared unpredictably, powerful, arrogant, and firm in their beliefs. It was not an easy task to make these people submit to them. The 3 War Bear brothers didn't fail to live up to their expectations. As soon as they took office, they used iron-blooded methods to intimidate everyone, including those powerful necromancers. The rest of the dissatisfied ones were thrown into the dark prison to work as laborers. Due to the ferocious might of the magical beasts from the divine realm, no one dared to speak out. However, the peaceful situation was broken today. A soldier from the Red Silk Army quickly ran in, looking nervous as he whispered a few words into the ear of the eldest, Arnold. "What?" Arnold quietly listened to the soldier's report, then opened his eyes. "There's actually such a thing?" "Yes. First city leader, it's already chaotic over there," the human soldier said nervously. As there was only one position for city leader, there were 3 for the 3 battle bear brothers, and they were all magical beasts from the divine realm. Naturally, there was no distinction between them, so their subordinates usually called them the first city leader, second city leader, and third city leader. "Got it. You can leave first." Arnold smiled coldly and stood up. "Yes, first city lord." The messenger soldier bowed his head and saluted, then turned and left with his head lowered. "Boss, is something the matter?" Second brother, Abel, turned around and looked at his eldest brother with a smile. Something did happen. The eldest brother, Arnold, smiled and didn't hide it from his 2 brothers. He waved his hand and dismissed the maids on his left and right. Then, he said seriously, "There's a riot in the underground dungeon." "Oh." Before Abel, the second brother of the Earth Warbear, answered, Ashtu, the third brother, straightened up. His eyes sparkled with excitement. It could be seen that he was very interested in this matter. "Ron is back." "Yes, it's that Ron. He entered the underground dungeon and killed many of our people." Those remnants of the Scourge Church also became restless and started making trouble with that guy. Arnold's expression was somewhat ugly, and his ferocious face was overflowing with murderous intent. Hee, since that's the case, there's no point in keeping these people alive. Just kill them all. Second brother, Abel, smiled coldly. "Including that Ron." "That's right," eldest Arnold said with a gloomy face. "Maybe it's because we've been quiet for too long, and these people have forgotten how terrifying we are." Third brother, Ashta, stood up and smiled coldly. "We've been bored out of our wits during this period of time. This is good. We can finally have some fun. I heard that this Ron is a divine realm expert." Abel smiled. "Believe me, we'll definitely enjoy this happy day." As they spoke, the 3 Earth War Bears looked at each other. Soon, they could clearly feel the murderous intent in each other's eyes. The entire Undercity was in chaos. With Ron's prestige and charisma in the Scourge Church, he quickly gained the allegiance of many of his former subordinates, especially those who were still loyal to the Scourge Church, even though most of them were in the dungeon. Perhaps it was because they had been suppressed for too long, but their anger was ignited in an instant. Like a ferocious tiger released from its cage, they killed the guards, rushed out of the dungeon, and surged into the streets. They chanted familiar incantations, and countless undead, skeletons, ghouls, and even black knights and bone dragons were summoned. These undead creatures, which had not been seen for a long time, once again appeared on the spacious streets of Undercity. The residents of Undercity were dumbfounded. They quietly looked at the undead creatures on the streets, and their thoughts seemed to return to the peaceful and happy days half a year ago. They did not know why, but after seeing these familiar things, a sense of security rose in their hearts. The people roared. They tore off the shameful symbol on their bodies and took out the undead clothing that they had carefully collected from their homes. More and more people joined the group. "Mother, look!" Kristen stood at the entrance of the tavern and pointed at the group on the streets. Her face was full of excitement. "It's Lord Ron. It's really him. They're back. They're all back," Madame Magus murmured, tears flowing down her cheeks. Her husband, Kristen's father, was once a death knight of the Scourge Church, but he lost his life in the defense of Undercity half a year ago. "Marples, do you see it? Lord Ron is back. The Scourge Church is back. Everything you gave up your life to protect, they're all back. Mother, let's go too." Kristen's eyes no longer had the confusion from before. Instead, it was replaced by a firm belief. The mother and daughter quickly rushed back to the room in the tavern. After a while, a necromancer and a necromancer walked out of the tavern's entrance. Kristen, who was wearing a necromancer's robe, began to chant, summoning a large number of skeletons. The necromancer's mother, Madame Magus, was busy casting necromancy spells on her daughter and the undead creatures she summoned, such as bloodthirst and rapid recovery. The group grew larger and larger. Undercity was originally the main city of the Scourge Church, the place where the belief of the undead was the strongest. As long as Ron instigated it a little, it would become a powerful force that couldn't be stopped. Everyone knew one fact, and that was that Undercity had changed. Ron, Gid, and the others walked in the group. Gid had already completely recovered, but his spirit was still somewhat sluggish. Ron, who was beside him, had a cold expression, a trace of worry faintly flashing between his brows. The entire underground prison had been destroyed, but other than Gid, Ron didn't see anyone familiar. Where was Aurora, Kadena, Delin, Becerra, and his mentor, Homelin? None of these people were here. Where did they go? Could he have been killed? Thinking of this, Ron gradually became worried. He turned his head and asked the fat guy next to him. "They were also caught," Gid said straightforwardly. "It's just that I don't know where they are being held." Ron pondered for a moment. "Maybe someone knows." With a shake of his hand, 2 souls were released by Ron. Gid took a closer look and saw that one was the prison's small leader, Dingle, and the other was the Red Silk Army's picket captain, Dunkirk. He didn't expect that these 2 guys had been killed. "I've searched the entire underground prison," Ron said expressionlessly, "but I can't find the people I'm looking for. Do you know where they are?" Ron asked Dunkirk. Dunkirk didn't expect Ron to act so quickly. In just half an hour, the entire Undercity had been turned upside down. I don't know. They should all be here," Dunkirk said, trembling with fear. "I've told you everything I know. You don't know? Very well, then there's no use in keeping you." Ron snorted coldly, followed by a scream. Dunkirk's soul was turned into ashes under Ron's power. Dingle saw this scene and was terrified to the extreme. "Now it's your turn. If you don't know anything, you'll end up like him," Ron said indifferently, as if he had done something trivial. I know something." Dingle suppressed the fear in his heart and said calmly, "But I need some guarantee. A guarantee about my life." "You have no choice." Ron was still expressionless, but the murderous intent on his face gradually appeared. I know. Seeing that Ron was about to attack him, Dingle shouted in fear. "They are imprisoned in another city, in Pompeii, which was the capital of the former new kingdom of Ebbia." "Very well, since I know everything, then you're useless?" "Sorry, your weak soul power is of no use to me." Ron finished speaking and gently crossed his hands. Dingle's soul also disappeared into the air along with Dunkirk's soul. "Ron, what are you going to do?" Gid looked at Ron, who killed decisively, and swallowed hard. This kid had changed too much in a few years. He was faintly showing the domineering demeanor of a king. "I'm going to Pompeii." Ron smiled. "I'll leave this place to you." Ron smiled. He tried to suppress the killing intent from the bottom of his heart, but the fists hidden in his sleeves gradually clenched. Gid was stunned when he heard this. Is this okay? Why not? You know most of the people in the Scourge Church and know that you're my brother. They'll listen to your orders and help you deal with the matters in Undercity. Ron smiled. Of course, before I leave, I'll help you solve a problem. What problem? Gid asked subconsciously. Chapter 826. Ron. While Kid was still in a daze, a loud voice rang in everyone's ears, causing their eardrums to buzz. Hearing this thunderous voice, everyone's hearts tightened. The chaotic situation immediately calmed down, and a trace of fear slowly surfaced on everyone's faces. The Castellans were here, those three terrifying magical beasts from the God Realm. Although many people had never seen the three Castellans before, the words magical beasts from the God Realm resounded like thunder in their ears. No matter how powerful Ron was, would he be able to defeat three terrifying magical beasts from the God Realm? The frenzied crowd calmed down, and their gazes simultaneously turned to the king in their hearts. Ron raised his head slightly and saw that on the tall house beside the road, three burly men had appeared at some point. Their appearances were somewhat similar. Although they were in human form, the ferocious and terrifying magical beasts' auras couldn't be concealed. It was them. Before Ron entered Undercity, he had already sensed three powerful auras from the God Realm. They were the three magical beasts from the God Realm in front of him. Ron, when your Calamity Church's main city was captured by us, you cowardly tortoise hid somewhere and didn't dare to come out. But now, you can walk right into our trap. The leader, Arnold, sneered. In his heart, he had already regarded Ron as a dead man. Since you're looking for death, don't blame us. The second brother, Abel, had a ferocious glint in his eyes as he approached step by step. Go to hell. The third brother, Ashton, shouted crazily, desperately releasing the murderous intent in his heart. No matter how strong Ron was against the three magical beasts from the God Realm, he would definitely die. With the three of them working together and using the Earth Elemental Domain, even the leader, Iron Armor, wouldn't have an advantage. Could this brat's strength be higher than Lord App's? Roar! With a long roar that shook the earth, the fragile house suddenly collapsed. In the flying smoke and dust, three supergiant bears that were bigger than elephants revealed their strong bodies. A black bear, a brown bear, a white bear, and three great earth war bears exuded a terrifying divine domain aura, which instantly enveloped the entire space. Even though they were extremely far away, they were still able to frighten people. The most terrifying thing was that these three great earth war bears all used earth elemental energy. Since they've delivered themselves to my doorstep, I might as well deal with them all at once. Ron sneered as killing intent surged in his heart. This was the first thing he wanted to do after returning to Undercity. If he could not prove that he was strong enough to protect everyone, then everything he had done before would be in vain. The riot would be suppressed very quickly. Earth wall, earth spike, earth shattering. The three war bears roared at the same time, and the powerful earth elemental energy raised monstrous waves. The heavy earth elemental energy pressured everyone to the point that they were unable to breathe. At the center of the storm, an intense pressure zone was formed. The ground was lifted up and the earth began to crack. As the leader, Arnold immediately used an earth-type forbidden spell. Heavens, how powerful was this force? Only those who were personally involved in the battle knew how frightening the strength of these three magical beasts from the god's domain was. In front of this frightening earth magic, they realized how insignificant they were. Their eyes were filled with fear as they all focused on Ron at the same time. Ron's mind was incomparably firm. At this moment, he unhurriedly took out his weapon and chanted an incantation in a low voice. Rumble. A loud sound reverberated throughout the area. It was as if heaven and earth had split open. A black fog silently appeared and transformed into a huge skeleton. Death Hand. Killing intent surged in Ron's eyes as the huge hand that blotted out the sky pressed down on the three war bears. Boom. Rumble. The earth quaked and the mountains shook again. The terrifying earth elemental power collapsed like snow melting in spring after coming into contact with Ron's hand of death. How could this be? The three war bears were stupefied. Everything happened too fast, so fast that they weren't prepared for it. While they were still in a daze, the death hand that Ron summoned slammed down on the three war bears. Bang! The hand of death slammed down and directly smashed Arnold into meat paste. In just one exchange, Ron killed a god domain magical beast. Both April and Atushi were scared out of their wits. Everything that happened in front of them toppled their understanding of the world. They finally understood that this Ron in front of them was not someone to be trifled with. His strength definitely surpassed Chief Apps, perhaps even on par with Kleiss. What kind of strength did he have? High Order God Domain? Peak God Domain? But now was not the time to think about these things. The most important thing now was to run. April and Atushi wailed, turning around at the same time. At this moment, the two war bears' clumsy bodies turned into wild dogs, turning around to flee. For the first time, they truly witnessed what death was. Want to run? Not a chance. Ron sneered in his heart. The death hand reached out, slapping April to death in an instant. I was wrong. I was wrong. Don't kill me. At this time, Ashton was completely flustered. He no longer cared about escaping and transformed into his human form. Plop! He knelt down and begged for mercy in a tearful voice. Hooray! Cheers erupted from the crowd, like a tidal wave that shook the entire city. Everyone was desperately chanting Ron's name, drowning out Atushi's pleas. Ron stood in the middle of the crowd like a king, slowly approaching Atushi under the crowd's escort. He stared at the dispirited guy in front of him. Lord Ron, I was wrong. Please spare my life. I'm willing to surrender. From now on, I swear allegiance to the Scourge Church. Atushi knelt on the ground, lowering his head so that Ron couldn't see his eyes filled with resentment and unwillingness. He knew that he had to save his life now. Moreover, Atushi was strongly confident that Ron wouldn't kill him. The Scourge Church needed manpower the most now, not to mention a god domain magical beast. But Atushi had already made up his mind. If he escaped with his life, he would kill this guy immediately. The surrounding people were full of resentment, but their eyes were fixed on Ron. This matter could only be handled by him. Atushi's wishful thinking was very good, but unfortunately, Ron didn't buy it. Your strength is not bad, but I'm sorry. Your hands are stained with the blood of the Scourge Church, so you must die. After saying this coldly, Ron directly devoured Atushi's soul under Atushi's terrified expression. When Atushi's corpse fell to the ground, the crowd once again erupted in cheers. At this time, Kid walked up and gave Ron a big hug, then heavily punched him on the shoulder. Well done, you bastard. Although I really want to beat you up, I still have to say, you fucking did well. Ron was moved. He knew that too many expectations had been placed on him. When the Scourge Church underwent such a huge change, he was trapped outside the Noah continent, powerless to do anything. Right, Ron. What do you plan to do next? Kid took a deep breath, calmed himself down, and asked seriously. Ron coldly smiled but didn't answer. He slightly raised his head, and his figure became fainter and fainter in front of everyone. I'm back. I'll take back everything that once belonged to me. Red Silk Army. None of these bastards will live in this world. As soon as he finished speaking, Ron's body completely disappeared into thin air. Chapter 827. As night fell in Pompeii City, the silence added a sense of mystery. It was as if a giant beast was lying there, motionless, with only a little starlight embellishing it. Perhaps they had stayed in Bartlow's prison for too long. Every time the Red Silk Army occupied a city, they would build a huge prison and throw all the dissidents inside. Pompeii City was no exception. However, the prison here was much larger than the one in Undercity. The underground prison in Pompeii City was heavily guarded. There was a sentry every 3 steps and a sentry every 5 steps. They were fully armed soldiers. These soldiers were of various races, including humans, orcs, and even elves. However, they all had one thing in common. which was that they all wore the armband of the Red Silk Army. There were also many guards who were more powerful than ordinary soldiers. It was so tight that not even a mosquito could fly out. That night, a tall figure stood at the gate of the prison. "Open the door," the tall figure said in a hoarse voice. "Yes, Sir Apps." The soldiers of the Red Silk Army saluted respectfully. After a while, the heavy prison gate slowly opened with the sound of a mechanism turning. Apps nodded and then walked in with his head held high. The heavy gate slowly closed again. The prison in Pompeii City was divided into 3 levels. The first level imprisoned ordinary dissidents. The second level imprisoned people with a certain amount of strength and extremely important identities. The third level locked up the most dangerous and important prisoners. On the third level of the prison, there were even layers of restrictions. Apps walked all the way to the third level. Even with his noble status and high position in the Red Silk Army, he had to honestly say the prison's password. Apps walked all the way to the end of the third level of the prison. He stood in front of a door for a while and took a deep breath. "Open this." "Yes, Sir Apps." The prison guard responded. He took out 2 extremely complicated keys from his arms, inserted them into the keyhole one by one, and then slowly twisted the mechanism. Zap, zap, zap. With the sound of the iron chain turning, the heavy iron door slowly opened. The guard on the third level made an inviting gesture. "Sir Apps, please come in." Apps nodded and walked into the most heavily guarded room in Pompeii's underground prison. In the empty room, there were dozens of huge iron chains. On the wall, which was as smooth as a sword, was an ancient inscription that emitted a faint blue light. This was a barrier formed by a magic array, which restricted the power of the people in the room. In the entire prison of Pompeii City, anyone who could receive such preferential treatment was naturally not an ordinary person. A young man sat quietly on the ground with his eyes closed. It was unknown how long he had been imprisoned. His body was filthy beyond recognition. His clothes seemed to be stained with blood, but they had been dried for a long time. His right hand was cut off at the base, and 3 thick iron chains bound his hands and feet tightly like an iron clamp. However, the most shocking thing was that a few of the thin iron chains had passed through his body and locked onto his shoulder blades. Hearing the sound, the youth slowly opened his eyes. "You're here." "Yes, I'm here." Apps walked in front of the youth, stood still, and said in a deep voice, "Kay, have you thought it through?" Kay, the golden Beaumont who fought at the bloody battle in Undercity, defeated the iron-armored demonic ape Apps, and made countless magical beasts in the realm of the gods tremble in fear. After being defeated by Klein, he was imprisoned here. Judging from the treatment he received, he did not seem to be living well. "Think about what?" Kay narrowed his eyes and smiled slightly. "Surrender." Apps's pupils shrank slightly. He could feel the clear, killing intent in the youth's eyes. The powerful and terrifying super-ranked magical beast in front of him evoked a deep and unforgettable memory in App's mind. As long as you are willing to surrender and pledge your loyalty to the Red Silk Army, then not only will you get your freedom, you will also get everything you want. "You know, the continent of Noah is now under the rule of my Red Silk Army." The room fell silent. Only the light breathing of the two could be heard. It was not the first time Kay persuaded someone to surrender, but this time he was unusually silent. Why did you choose me?" Finally, Kay broke the silence and raised his head to ask. "Because you are the strongest magical beast. Your joining is of great significance to the Red Silk Army." Apps said slowly, "We need your strength, Brother Kay." "Ha ha ha." Hearing this, Kay laughed loudly. He supported himself with one hand and sat up, looking at Apps from head to toe. Apps frowned slightly. "What are you laughing at?" "I'm laughing at your naivety." Kay laughed coldly. "This is probably not your intention. Your superiors sent you to persuade me, right?" "Ha! Haven't you thought that if I am willing to join you with my strength, I will replace your position? My defeated opponents." Kay laughed coldly, his tone full of mockery. "I don't mind." Without waiting for Kay to finish, Apps interrupted him. "Oh." This time, Even Kay was surprised. You're right. If you're willing to join us, it won't be long before you replace my position. Just as you said, I am your defeated opponent. I am the leader of the magical beast army. No one knows those magical beasts better than I do. Compared to those useless qualifications, I believe the magical beasts respect the strong more. App said, his tone full of honesty. Looking at App's sincere gaze, Kay fell silent. He lowered his head and asked after a long while, "Why? Haven't you already occupied the Noah continent? What use do I have for you?" "Because we have a bigger goal." Apps took a deep breath. "That is the main plane." Kay was stunned. "The main plane?" "That's right, the main plane." Apps nodded and said seriously, "Once upon a time, our Red Silk Army was also one of the few major forces in the main plane. Lord Utaris also reached the peak of his personal reputation. At that time, the Red Silk Army was at its peak." "I understand." Kay nodded. "I know a little about the Red Silk Army. After Utaris failed, he was imprisoned in Bartlow's prison. He came out this time to make a comeback." Kay pointed at herself and smiled. "He sent you here to trick me into becoming his cannon fodder to conquer the main plane." "Please don't use the word cannon fodder." App's expression was a little ugly. "You are loyal to Lord Utaris, so you can share his glory. Lord Utaris never mistreats a subordinate who has contributed to his cause. He is a natural leader, the proud sky dragon, the king of all magical beasts." Apps waved his hands and said excitedly, "Kay, you don't have to think about it. If you are loyal to Lord Utaris, you will get everything you want, including power. Also, I can swear that I have no selfish intentions towards you. You are young and stronger than me, and you have more potential. You are a strong person. You should have power and status that is commensurate with yours." Kay fell silent. He lowered his head again, and the room returned to silence. It was so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard. "Is he considering it?" Apps looked at Kay, who was deep in thought, and a glimmer of hope rose in his heart. "I refuse." After thinking for a while, Kay finally raised his head again. This time, there was no hesitation in his eyes. "What?" Apps was stunned, as if he could not believe his ears. "I have to say, your conditions are very attractive, but I still choose to refuse. Compared to those so-called glory, I have something that I have always wanted to protect. As for Utaris, no matter how strong he is, whether he is a divine beast or a magical beast, it has nothing to do with me." Kay laughed. At this moment, he laughed like an innocent child. "All right, you can leave. I don't think you need to come again. No matter what you say, I will not change my mind." "Bastard." App's anger rose in him, and he scolded loudly. "Kay, don't refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. If it wasn't for Lord Klein who saw your power and potential, would I have to go through so much trouble?" "You finally said it." Kay smiled. "Klein, is he the necromancer who defeated me? The divine power he used. It doesn't seem to be his own power. Say what you will. There is no doubt about Lord Klein's power." Apps was so angry that he laughed. He realized that he had lost his composure and quickly calmed down. At this moment, Apps pointed above and sneered. "Kay, the thing you said you wanted to protect. Is it the mother and daughter locked up there?" "Did I guess wrong?" "What?" Hearing this, Kay's body trembled, and he suddenly became furious. "Bastard, what are you trying to do? If you dare touch a hair on them, I will kill you. Even if it's the Red Silk Army. I will kill every one of you on sight until you are all dead." Kay stood up with a swoosh, the chains all over his body rattling. His remaining strength stirred up his muscles, and his fists gradually clenched. This time, Apu's killing had hit him where it hurt the most, and Kai was truly enraged. "It's too early for you to say this. If you have the guts, say it when you get out." Looking at Kay's murderous gaze, Apps was a little afraid, but he forced himself to calm down. "I'm leaving. Tomorrow morning. I will send their heads to you. I hope you will like this gift." "Ha ha ha. Bastard, stop right there." Bang! The metal door slammed shut. Apps turned and walked out, leaving behind Kay's angry roar. Chapter 828. "You're back? What's the situation?" Seeing Apps walk in, Klein, who had been waiting for a long time, finally opened his eyes. Apps forced a smile. "I'm sorry, Master. Apps can't complete the mission." "I knew it." Klein sighed. "These guys from the Scourge Church, every one of them is as hard as a rock. Homelin is like that. This Golden Beaumont is like that. Even that grand necromancer called Vivian is like that." Klein shook his head and waved his hand. "Kill them all. These people aren't on the same side as us. There's no point in keeping them alive. Save me the trouble of worrying about them. If one of them accidentally escapes, it'll be troublesome." "Yes, Master. I'll take care of this matter tomorrow," Apps said respectfully. Klein nodded slightly, then asked, "How's Mary? Haven't you found her yet?" "No," Apps said honestly. "That woman seems to have disappeared. There's no trace of her at all, but there are quite a few people who know her. If you can't find her, what's the use of knowing her?" Klein shook his head. If that guy didn't have the key to that broken world, who would be interested in this old human woman? "You have to hurry up with this matter. Don't delay. Otherwise, you know the consequences," Klein said, his tone becoming stern. "Yes, Master. You can leave now." Klein waved his hand and dismissed Apps. After Apps left, Klein felt an inexplicable sense of irritation. He stood up and paced back and forth in the room, then sat down heavily. He poured a cup of tea, took a sip, and then looked out at the sky with a sinister gaze. Why? Why do I always have an uncomfortable feeling? Am I thinking too much? Or? Klein lowered his head and looked at the blood-red tea in the cup. Only then did he realize that the hand holding the teacup was trembling slightly. In an ordinary cell on the second floor of Pompeii's underground prison, in a dark room, Becerra and her daughter Isis hugged each other tightly, their expressions full of uneasiness. "Mom, I'm scared." Isis hugged her mother tightly and buried her head in Becerra's arms. Her small face was filled with fear. The prison guard who had just walked and announced to them that they would be executed the next day. "Don't be afraid, baby." Becerra lowered her head and kissed the little face of her daughter in her arms. She hugged her even tighter, and her tears fell like beads from a broken necklace. "Daddy will definitely come and save us." "Dad, will he really come?" "Yes, I definitely will." In the night, on a hill outside Pompeii, a strange shadow suddenly appeared. The shadow stood on the hill, which was not very high, and quietly watched the huge city in front of him. It was close to midnight, and the millions of residents of Pompeii had already fallen asleep. Only the magic lamp outside the door was weakly lit, and from time to time, 1 or 2 dog barks could be heard. This shadow was Ron. He stood there quietly, as if waiting for something. Whoosh! Dozens of crows descended from the sky and surrounded Ron. Some even stood directly on Ron's shoulders. There were also some indistinct ghosts. They were all in Ron's eyes, but compared to the crows flying in the sky, the ghosts were very slow. "So they are here. That's great." Through the reconnaissance of Pompeii, Ron knew the general situation of Becerra and the others being imprisoned. Knowing that they were still alive, Ron finally breathed a sigh of relief. "Now, it's time to act. Don't even think about leaving. I will make you guys pay the price you deserve." The corners of Ron's mouth curled into a smile, but his eyes gradually became cold. A white translucent bone staff appeared in Ron's palm, and then an ancient spell from the depths of his soul floated out of his mouth. The flames of war on the battlefield burn the bodies of the warriors. Unyielding spirits, I can understand the hatred in your hearts. For the distant heaven, for the faith of death. Awaken, my warriors. Your anger and resentment will turn into a terrifying power. Destroy all the evil that is hidden under the sanctimonious face. Ron's body erupted with a large amount of black fog, which drifted around like the wind. Under his feet, the soil began to harden, forming a large black crystal with a green fog. The black fog drifted in all directions, shrouding the hills, the plains, and the area around Pompeii City. Under the nourishment of this strange black fog, the ghosts hidden deep underground began to stir. Ka, ka, ka. The hardened soil continued to shake, and heads emerged one after another. The undead from the depths of hell, listened to the call of the ancient spell and came to this land. Skeleton warriors, skeleton mages, black knights, terror knights, gargoyles, ghouls, zombies, ghosts, abyssal bone dragons. Undead. The mountains and plains were filled with undead. They were as dense as ants, and there were so many of them that not even a drop of water could trickle through Pompeii City, which had been around for thousands of years. The entire Pompeii City was surrounded by hundreds of thousands of undead. From the ground to the air, not a single bird could fly out. At this time, a skeleton crawled out of the soil. It was holding a one-handed longsword and wearing heavy armor. Compared to ordinary skeletons, it was taller and looked unusually heroic. However, the muscles on its face had long rotted, and its eyes revealed black eye sockets. The heroic skeleton gently shook its head, shaking off the dust on its body. Then it raised the longsword in its hand high and let out a long roar that resounded through heaven and earth. Roar. Hundreds of thousands of undead roared in unison, and the terrifying momentum shook the entire mountain. What? Klein was startled, and the cup in his hand fell to the ground with a clang, shattering into pieces. He stood up abruptly and opened his eyes wide, revealing a strong look of disbelief. This aura, this power, Klein finally knew what was going on. His hands were shaking. That's right. It was Ron. Ron had returned. In an instant, the entire Pompeii City was awakened, and magic lamps lit up one by one. The soldiers of the Red Silk Legion who were guarding the city looked at the undead that had come out of nowhere, and their legs had long since turned soft. What is this? Damn it. It's the undead. We're surrounded. Undead. So many undead. They're going to attack us. Quick. Sound the alarm. Reporting to Sir Klein. Dong. 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 The bells of the 4 bell towers in the north, south, east, and west rang, completely breaking the tranquility of Pompeii City. It cannot be said that the soldiers guarding the city did not do their duty, but it all came too late. The undead were going to attack. That tall, heavy-armored, and exceptionally gorgeous skeleton stood there quietly. At this moment, it felt as if it had returned to the battlefield. That familiar aura made one's blood boil, and behind it were the people it had always loved. That's right, it was the Sovereign King. The Skeleton King pointed the long sword in its hand forward, and its mouth, which was only connected to a layer of skin, slightly opened as it issued a long-awaited order. Attack! Chapter 829. Sounds of killing came from afar, and a terrifying aura reverberated in the air above the battlefield. Countless undead rushed towards the new Abia. Boom! The black tide crashed into the solid walls of Pompeii City. Then, something terrifying happened. The skeletons at the front squeezed together, and a layer of seawater rose up like a tide. They're actually attacking the city like this. The Red Silk Army soldiers with armbands were stunned. They had never seen such a method of attacking a city. They're coming so fast. A red-haired soldier of the Red Silk Army screamed. His voice was filled with fear. At this moment, a massive shadow descended from the sky, grabbed him, and flew him into the air. A blood-curdling scream came from the sky, and not long after, the lifeless corpse fell from the sky. Abyssal bone dragon. So many abyssal bone dragons. The soldiers shouted. They shot magic and arrows into the sky. But at this time, where was the shadow of the abyssal bone dragon? Gargoyles, abyssal bone dragons. These powerful undead creatures formed a black cloud that shrouded Qinlai with their terrifying numbers. Look, there's a frost dragon. They're rushing here. Another Red Silk Army soldier cried out in fear, his eyes filled with despair. It's a divine necromancer. Only a divine necromancer can summon a frost dragon. The commander guarding one of the city walls had a bitter taste in his mouth. A necromancer was the most powerful profession among the undead. Once he advanced to the divine realm, his strength would increase exponentially. When a necromancer divine magus descended, it meant invincibility on the small Noah continent. Let's retreat. We can't fight like this. The commander let out a long breath. He took out a long sword from his spatial ring and shouted, "Everyone, listen to my orders. Cover each other. Retreat, yes. Sir." The soldiers shouted. The commander's order received a unanimous response. They quickly separated themselves from the undead and slowly retreated down the city wall. Looking at the backs of the soldiers slowly retreating, the commander of the Scourged Church let out a sigh of relief. Undead divine Magus Homelin had been captured and imprisoned in Pompeii City's prison. Apart from Klein, there was no other undead divine Magus in the entire Noah continent, so the identity of this undead divine Magus was obvious. Ron. Lord Ron must have returned. There was a trace of excitement on the commander's face. They were originally soldiers of the new Ebia Empire. When they received the order of the new crown prince, Catherine, they immediately surrendered. These soldiers of the new Ebia Empire were not very loyal to the Red Silk Legion, so they would not risk their lives for it. It was ridiculous that Klein thought that these soldiers were trustworthy and imprisoned the prisoners of the Scourged Church in Pompeii City and gave them the task of guarding it. The undead army did not spend much effort to rush up the city wall. The city gate opened, and tens of thousands of undead poured in. So smooth. Ron, who was monitoring everything in all aspects, quickly discovered the abnormality. He thought about it and knew the reason, and a smile appeared on his face. Hee, so that's how it is. Klein, today is the day you die. Countless undead poured into Pompeii City and killed on the streets. The residents of the city closed their doors and did not want to be enemies with the undead. The undead did not make things difficult for them and directly rushed to the underground prison in the center of the city. Don't worry, my partners, we will meet soon. Thinking of this, Ron's face showed a trace of excitement and joy, but it was only for a moment before the joy on his face was immediately replaced by anger. Roar, roar, roar. With a wild roar, countless houses in the center of Pompeii City collapsed, and tall figures appeared from the night. The god-level magical beasts of the Red Silk Legion had finally made their move. The god-level magical beast, the Hydra, which was bigger than a small mountain, the Beholder King, which was floating in the air, the Harpy Queen, which was bigger than a flying dragon, and the huge and fierce crowned griffin. These god-level magical beasts, which had descended from other planes, finally showed themselves. They revealed their ferocious faces. Their leader was among the magical beasts, even more powerful than dragons, second only to the Golden Beaumont, the armored demon Ape-Apes. 23, no less than 23 god-level magical beasts stood in the middle of Pompeii City. Countless magic, do-chi, fists, and claws blasted toward the surging undead. The god-level magical beasts were abnormally powerful. With just a move and a half, without even using their domain power, they directly blasted the undead away, but there were too many undead creatures. Like soldiers who were not afraid of death, they swarmed toward the god-level magical beasts, weapons and magic constantly greeting them. Another group of undead rushed directly to the underground prison of Pompeii City, releasing the people imprisoned in the prison. Sir Apps, what's going on? Why are there suddenly so many undead and frost dragons? Where did they come from? A giant bear with sharp claws approached Apps and asked nervously, "Could it be Sir Klein?" What the giant bear with sharp claws did not say was, could it be that Sir Klein had gone crazy? After all, according to their impression, other than Klein, there was no other god-level necromancer in the entire Noah continent. And judging from the undead creatures summoned, this god-level necromancer was abnormally powerful. The strength of a necromancer was directly proportional to the strength of the undead creatures he summoned. What did you say, Sir Klein? That's impossible. I just saw him. Apps waved his iron fist and blasted the abyss-bone dragon that flew in front of him into pieces. His eyes were fixed on a corner in the distance as he gritted his teeth and spoke sternly. It's Ron? Ron is back. This guy's strength is not below Sir Klein's. Ron? Hearing this word, the giant bear with sharp claws could not help but shudder. This battle was not easy, Kay, who was resting in the prison with his eyes closed, felt as if a knife was being twisted in his heart. He stood up impatiently and paced a few steps in the prison. Why don't I just surrender to them? At least, Basara and Isis can keep their lives. Thinking of his sister's face, Kay's heart warmed up. At this moment, he heard a clamor outside the prison door. There were earth-shattering shouts and the terrified screams of the prison guards. What's going on? Could it be that someone came to save me? Kay was both surprised and happy when he heard this. He thought about it and felt that it was impossible. All the gods in the Noah continent had either submitted to the Red Silk Army or been killed. Who else would save them? While he was still in shock, the door to Kay's prison opened with a bang. A group of human-like figures rushed in. You are undead? Kay's eyes widened in disbelief. Then, a thought flashed through his mind, and his gaze became joyful. Could it be that you were sent by Ron? The skeletons that rushed and did not speak. A few skeletal warriors raised the long swords in their hands. Clang, clang, clang. With a few sounds, they cut the iron chains that imprisoned Kay. At this moment, the magic circle that was operating stopped, and the light blue light slowly disappeared. Kay only felt a surge of strength from the bottom of his heart and quickly fill his body. He lightly struggled, and the thick iron chains broke into pieces like tofu. My strength has been restored. Kay was overjoyed and excitedly shouted, Ron, is it you? Did you come back? Even if these skeletons could understand Kay, they did not have the ability to answer him. They only glanced at him and turned to walk out of the prison. Kay, Uncle Kay. Just as Kay was in a daze, two crisp voices sounded in his ears. Kay turned around, his eyes filled with surprise and joy. Basara, Isis, why are you here? It was these skeletons who saved us. Isis said loudly. No, it was Ron who saved us. Basara's face was filled with excitement. Tears welled up in her eyes. Although I don't have the talent to cultivate strength, I can feel that Ron must have come back. Yes, sister, your feeling is not wrong. It must be Ron who came to save us. Kay quickly walked up. Sister, are you okay? I'm fine. Basara looked at the crisscrossing scars on Kay's body, and her heart twitched. Kay, your injuries. This little injury is not a problem. Kay laughed. Come with me, I'll bring you out. Kay did not transform into the Golden Beaumont's original body. He only used his pair of fists to beat the reinforcements. At this time, he slowly found some familiar people. Kadena, Aurora, Vivian. Suddenly seeing everyone, Kay was surprised and happy. You're all okay. That's great. Saya. Isis. Isis saw Saya and quickly ran over. The two children's hands tightly clasped together. It must be Ron who came to save us. Juliana smiled. As the Emperor, she was imprisoned for half a year, and her heart was filled with the joy of being reborn. It should be, there is no one in the whole continent who has such strength. I can even hear the cry of a frost dragon. Shea smiled. The sounds of fighting outside the prison could be heard, mixed with the roars of frost dragons from time to time. Where's the Great Elder? Have you seen the Great Elder? Vivian suddenly asked. I'm here. Merlin's figure appeared from corner. His necromancer robe was torn in many places, and he looked a little haggard, but he was still in good spirits. He said with a smile, That's right. You didn't guess wrong, it's Ron. I can't be wrong about his aura. Homelin shook his head, his face full of smiles. His strength is much stronger than before. Kay let out a long whistle, expelling the depression in her heart, and immediately felt refreshed. Since we're all here, let's kill our way out. Let's meet up with Ron as soon as possible. Chapter 830. Boom, boom, boom. As soon as Kay and the others stepped out of the prison, a bone-chilling cold air rushed over, almost blowing everyone down. They saw a huge frost dragon soaring in the sky, spitting out waves of cold dragon breath. So many frost dragons? Kay was dumbfounded. Did Ron bring the entire frost dragon army here? What powerful strength! Seeing Ron's powerful strength, even his mentor Homelin couldn't help but exclaim. At this time, Vivian behind him exclaimed, Great Elder, look! What kind of undead creature is that? It's actually so powerful. Everyone turned to look at the source of the sound and saw a giant figure suddenly appear in the flood of skeletons. It was wearing heavy armor, holding a scepter or a long sword, and had a crown on its head. It had an extraordinary bearing, and the most surprising thing was that its strength had actually reached the god realm. Skeletons from the divine realm? Hamelin was shocked, but his gaze immediately became serious. After thinking for a while, he said, "I remember, this guy is called the Skeleton Emperor. These undead creatures were all summoned by him. This guy can not only summon undead creatures, but also cast curses, blessing undead creatures and other skills. Skeleton Emperor?" Hamelin's words caused everyone to exclaim. Vivian's eyes flashed with envy. These guys are too powerful. Look at so many undead armies. They were all summoned by the Skeleton Emperor. Ron only summoned a few dozen Skeleton Emperors, and they formed an undead army of hundreds of thousands. Hamelin sighed. The Skeleton Emperor is naturally powerful, but it's a pity that its summoning method has been lost. I wonder where Ron learned it. Kay, Becerra, and the others didn't learn undead magic, so naturally, they didn't understand a word. Only Isis's little face was red as she buried herself in her mother's arms. Her sparkling eyes flashed with pride. Ron stood quietly. In fact, the entire battlefield was under his supervision. Suddenly seeing the figures of Hamelin and the others, he couldn't help but be excited. Great, they're finally safe. Then Ron's expression changed. Now was not the time to gather, and the battle was far from over. He smiled slightly, moved, and slowly rose up. In the night, a figure suddenly appeared in the sky above Pompeii's city. It was like a floating lamp, guiding the direction of the undead. "Look, Ron! It's Ron!" Bala and the others shouted when they saw the familiar figure and the black robe that hadn't changed for 10,000 years. Their faces were filled with tears of excitement. "Ron!" Kadena looked at Ron in the sky, tears filling her eyes. She pulled Saya, who was beside her. "Saya, look, he's Father, the greatest powerhouse." "Father?" Saya stood there in a daze. It was the first time he saw his father. That thin, unyielding figure and firm eyes were deeply imprinted in his mind. The main character has finally appeared. Ron's appearance had already attracted the attention of the Red Silk Army. Apsa's cold eyes swept over there. His gaze was like lightning, and he snorted coldly. Then, he signaled to the few magical beasts beside him. It wasn't worthwhile to fight with these undead. After fighting one wave, another wave would be summoned. Only by eliminating their summoner could they truly defeat these guys. "Let's go together." Aps growled. His tall figure leaped, and together with the other magical beasts, they madly pounced on Ron. The dozens of god-level magical beasts abandoned their opponents and turned their muzzles in unison, aiming at Ron in the sky. In an instant, the necromancer who had exposed himself became the target of public criticism. "Ron!" Kate couldn't help but exclaim. Being targeted by dozens of magical beasts was no laughing matter, especially the iron-armored ape in the lead. If it weren't for the fact that he hadn't recovered his strength and couldn't transform into the Golden Beaumont, he would have rushed forward already. As the magical beasts from the divine realm drew closer, the iron-armored ape apes began to run. The undead creatures in front of him, even the dread knights, were mercilessly knocked over by him. The distance of a few thousand meters was just a few leaps for him. Ron could even see the ferocious face hidden under his armor. Apps had already rushed to Ron's feet. He lowered his body and stomped on the burning building beside him. The powerful force instantly flattened the building. Borrowing the force of the impact, the iron-armored ape's heavy body leaped high into the air. Its huge fist brought with it a strong gust of wind as it punched viciously at Ron. "Ron!" Everyone's hearts clenched. For a necromancer who specialized in summoning, it was a very dangerous thing to let a magical beast from the divine realm get close to him. Facing the siege of dozens of magical beasts from the divine realm, Ron didn't panic. He didn't even chant an incantation, and an enormous force surged out. Death Guard! A huge skeleton appeared on Ron's body, enveloping him and merging with the small figure. It was indestructible. Boom! App's iron fist slammed into the Death Guard, causing the Death Guard's skeleton to tremble. Even a hard-bone armor cracked. Despite this, App still couldn't break through Ron's defense. In just a moment, the cracked bones quickly healed. How is this possible? Ron's strength caused the iron-armored ape to fall into a daze. At this moment, Ron made his move. Death Cage. Crack, crack. Dozens of bone cages sprang up like bamboo shoots after a rain. They quickly rose up and trapped the dozens of magical beasts from the divine realm on the ground. Even Apps was no exception. What the hell is this? You want to trap me with just these bones? Dream on. Damn necromancers. The trapped realm of the gods' magic beasts began to curse. They used their powerful bodies and sharp teeth to attack the cages. But what surprised them was that the cages were incomparably sturdy. Even the realm of the gods' magic beasts were unable to open them. Go to hell. The iron-armored ape was burning with anxiety. He roared and used all his strength to punch out. Crack! It broke a few bones. Apps was delighted. Just a few more hits, and this cage made of bones will open. Even so, the hardness of this death cage was still beyond his imagination. The death cage didn't have any attacking power. Ron's goal was to trap them. At this moment, Ron began his counterattack. A smoke-like pillar of light flew out from Ron's body and passed over the frightened Harpy Queen. Its target was the Beholder King behind her. The Beholder King was a magical beast from the divine realm who specialized in spiritual attacks. He could use confusion, illusion, coercion, fear, and other spiritual skills. He was more threatening than the iron-armored ape. The first person Ron dealt with was him. Bang! The Beholder King was hit by the gray pillar of light. His huge body trembled and released spiritual waves that spread across the entire area. The dozens of magical beasts from the divine realm all received his fearful cry for help. Not good. The Beholder King is in danger. Apu knew that things were not going well. He wanted to rush out to save them, but he was trapped by the death cage. He roared and broke a few more bones. At this moment, the Beholder King's cry for help became weaker. He opened his huge eye and looked at Ron, his eyes begging for mercy. Ron naturally received the Beholder King's spiritual waves. He snorted. Want to surrender? It's too late. You evil magical beasts from the divine realm will all die. Ron's eyes were filled with murderous intent. Bang! The Beholder King's head exploded like a watermelon. Blood and brain matter splattered all over the ground. The huge eye drooped, and the tentacles all over his body drooped down powerlessly. After being besieged by dozens of God Realm demonic beasts, Huang Xiaolong had killed one of them with ease. Hua Meilin and the others were stunned speechless for a long time. Bastard! Ron, I'll kill you! The iron-armored ape roared crazily. He raised his fist and pounced angrily into the air. Frost Nova! Smack! Apps only felt a bone-piercing chill. His whole body was covered in frost. Not only did his movements slow down, but even his thoughts became slow. At this moment, Ron's cold and emotionless voice sounded in his mind. Don't be hasty. It'll be your turn soon. Apps turned around in shock. He saw a black pillar of light spinning and shooting out, heading straight for the Harpy Queen in the air. The black tip of the spear shone with a cold light. It was the spear of death that struck fear in all enemies. Not good. The Harpy Queen. The Harpy Queen screamed and turned to escape. She was fast, but the spear of death was faster. It pierced through her head in an instant. Apps went crazy with the death of two divine realm magical beasts. Ron sneered and used the death cage to trap him again. Then, he went after the other divine realm magical beasts. Apps grabbed the edge of the cage with both hands. His eyes were red and his teeth were almost crushed. He roared angrily, Ron, let me out if you dare. Fight me one-on-one. Ron turned a deaf ear to App's clamor. Soon, more than 10 divine realm magical beasts died at his hands. These divine realm magical beasts trapped in the death cage were all killed in one blow without exception. Easy too easy. Hamelin and the others gaped, unable to close their mouths for a long time. These usually arrogant divine realm magical beasts were like weak cockroaches in front of Ron. He effortlessly stomped them to death. Were these still divine realm magical beasts? How could they be worse than ants? A terrifying aura of death enveloped the entire area. It was strange and tyrannical. Under the pressure of death, even the divine realm magical beasts of the Red Silk Army felt a shadow cast over their hearts. When they looked at Ron, their eyes were filled with fear. This little necromancer controlled their life and death. Watching one divine realm magical beast after another being killed by Ron, Apps was dumbfounded. The shock that Ron gave him far surpassed that of the Golden Beaumont. If he encountered the Golden Beaumont, Apps might be able to put up a fight with him, but this Ron in front of him was no match at all. The gap between the two was too big. What was his strength? High Order God Realm? Or Peak God Realm? App's body trembled, fear creeping into his heart. He had a feeling that even if the Peak God Realm Klein made a move, he might not be able to do anything to this Ron. In truth, the outcome of the battle between Klein and Ron had been decided long ago. Apps just didn't know it. Just this one person annihilated half of the Red Silk Army. Ron's strength shocked everyone. Everyone stared at the heroic figure in the sky, speechless for a long time. Great Elder, Ron now, what is his strength now? Shea asked. She felt that the gap between herself and Ron was so big that it made her despair. Back then, she was still his guardian knight, but now, it was probably his turn to protect her. I don't know. Homelin shook his head, a helpless smile on his face as he said, his current strength has far surpassed mine. His realm is not something I can touch. Now it's your turn. After killing more than 10 divine realm magical beasts, Ron's eyes were fixed on the trapped armored devil ape. With a chuckle, the black gas in his hand rapidly gathered, and under the guidance of a powerful divine force, it formed a spear of death and shot it at Apps. I am going to die. Trapped in the cage, Apps stared blankly at the spear of death that could take his life. Unable to resist, he closed his eyes in despair. Was today the end of the Red Silk Army? Boom! The spear of death exploded in front of Apps. At the critical moment, another spear of death shot out diagonally and saved App's life. Ron's body shook, and he turned around, quietly staring at the figure floating in the sky. You finally appeared. Ron turned around and stood still, his eyes slightly indifferent, and a faint smile appeared on his face. Chapter 831. Klein and Ron, the two divine necromancers wearing black robes and white bone armor, faced each other from a distance. Lord Klein, Apu took a deep breath and stood silently on the ground. His eyes were filled with gratitude. He knew that his strength was far inferior to the two of them. All he could do was bow at Klein from afar and leave helplessly. You are finally back. Klein gritted his teeth and quietly stared at the figure in the void in the distance. Yes, I'm back. Ron nodded and raised his head slightly. A trace of killing intent flashed across his calm face. Klein, are you ready? There was no need to say anything more. The two of them understood each other very well and understood that a great battle was unavoidable. At this moment, the atmosphere on the battlefield suddenly became tense, and an oppressive aura shrouded the entire place. Ron and Klein stood quietly in the air. It was as if everything between heaven and earth had stopped. The battle between the two divine necromancers was about to begin. Kadena, Becerra, and the others watched nervously. The corner of Ron's mouth twitched slightly, and the shadow of Colonel Pamir appeared in his eyes. Old hatred and new hatred surged in his heart, and in an instant, his face became extremely ferocious. Come, Klein. Today, either you die or I die. Either you die or I die. Klein gritted his teeth. He also understood that he had no way out. Roar. Dozens of frost dragons roared in unison, and the momentum shook the entire battlefield. Then, dozens of huge figures flew past Ron and pounced on Klein. Frost fell from the sky like a blizzard, and the entire Pompeii city turned into a world of white. Dozens of skeleton kings, who were wearing gorgeous armor and were several heads taller than ordinary skeletons, also flew up. They flapped the huge bone wings on their backs and pounced on Klein. Frost dragons and skeleton kings. These two undead creatures were peak divine realm powerhouses among the undead. With Ron's current strength, he could casually summon one of them and beat an ordinary divine realm powerhouse to the ground. What did this mean? This meant that Klein would have to face the siege of several dozen divine realm powerhouses. The situation was extremely bad. Of course, as an undead divine magus, Klein naturally knew how to summon these high-level undead creatures. He even taught Ron how to summon the Skeleton Emperor, so he could naturally summon the same undead creatures to deal with it. But who was Ron? If he wasn't completely confident, why would he appear in Pompeii City and lead the undead army to fight the Red Silk Army? If Ron could defeat Klein once, then he could defeat Klein a second time. The current him was far stronger than Klein. Klein naturally knew this. Ron, do you think you've already won? That's right. You have far surpassed me in necromancy magic, but Klein sneered as a hint of mockery flashed across the corner of his mouth. He stretched out his hand, and in his chicken claw-like fingers, a transparent thread that was as thin as a strand of hair gently jumped. Divine power of space. In order to defeat Ron, Klein directly used Sky Dragon Utaris's divine power of space. Spatial Blade. As soon as the spatial divine power was released, a huge domain was formed in the surrounding void. In this domain, it was as if everything had stopped. Even the movements of the Frost Dragon and the Skeleton Emperor had slowed down. Following that, countless blades appeared in the void and blasted towards the Skeleton Emperor and the Frost Dragon. Boom! 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 Dozens of Frost Dragons and Skeleton Emperors screamed at the same time. The sharp spatial blade directly tore through space and smashed the undead creatures into pieces in an instant. What? Ron had imagined countless possibilities, but the only one he hadn't thought of was actually this result. Looking at the undead creatures that turned into black smoke and disappeared, Ron was at a loss for a moment. Ron! A delicate cry came from not far away. The hearts of everyone in the Scourge Church were in their throats, and they couldn't help but worry for Ron. This is not the divine power of death, but the divine power of space. Ron's eyes flashed as he coldly shouted, "Ha ha!" Klein laughed out loud, and then he narrowed his eyes. "You're right, Ron. I'm using the divine power of space bestowed by Lord Utaris. This is a more powerful and mysterious power than the divine power of death." Klein sneered. "So, Ron, you're definitely not my opponent. Today is the day you die. Is that so?" Ron said, not to be outdone, "So, Klein, you've already betrayed your faith?" Necromancers believed in the power of the god of death, not the power of the god of space. As a necromancer who cultivated the power of the soul and believed in the god of death, Klein had indeed betrayed his faith. Betrayed? Ron, if you must use this word, then it's not wrong. Klein sneered, and his slightly raised mouth revealed a row of snow-white teeth. Whether it's the god of death or the undead of the main plane, they're not worthy of my loyalty. They were once powerful, but that's all in the past. At this point, Klein's eyes flashed with a trace of passion. Only Lord Utaris, only the Red Silk Army, is worthy of my sacrifice. What death faith, what undead race, all of them can go to hell. Homelin's eyes stared fixedly at Klein, who was shouting in the sky, and helplessly sighed, "This guy's gone crazy." Ron took a deep breath, and a trace of sorrow flashed in his eyes. Klein, this guy was already hopeless. In that case, I don't need to say any more. Klein, I'll use the divine power of death to fight you to the death. Come. Klein's eyes flashed with endless fighting spirit. Ron, I want you to understand that the divine power of death is no match for the divine power of space. Blade of Space. Klein's face was filled with murderous intent, and the powerful divine power of space erupted once again. This time, the divine power of space was even more powerful than before. The scope of the divine power of space continued to expand, and in just a moment, it enveloped the entire Pompeii city. The entire space, covered by the divine power, seemed to be completely controlled. In this small space, Klein was like a high and mighty god, controlling everyone's life and death. This was the divine power of space. Its profound meaning was to control space. Klein had completely betrayed his faith. The current him was even more powerful and difficult to deal with than when he had fought with Ron. Chapter 832. Faced with such a mysterious, terrifying, and tyrannical spatial divine power, Ron felt an unprecedented pressure. He took a deep breath, and the familiar face of the Lich King Hermes appeared in his mind. Lord Lich King, you are right. Because of the depravity of the undead, I need to strengthen my faith. Ron's eyes suddenly became clear. He slowly raised his trembling hand, and a hard-to-understand incantation came out of his mouth. Even a knowledgeable Homelin had never heard of this incantation before. Death Domain. A black energy spread out, rapidly expanding in the space created by Klein. The laws of space and the laws of death intertwined with each other, fiercely colliding with each other like two armies at war. Spatial divine power and death divine power broke through the void, constantly spreading out in all directions. A black sphere slowly unfolded in the sky, forming a huge area of low pressure. Like a ball of air, it revealed a spatial crack that constantly twisted like a snake. Very quickly, the laws created by the divine power of death gained the upper hand, swallowing Klein's spatial divine power in an instant. What? Impossible. Klein was shocked to the extreme. How is this possible? This is the spatial divine power bestowed upon me by Lord Utaris, Klein shouted in his mind. He used his spatial divine power with all his might, but his domain was rapidly shrinking. Klein was using the spatial divine power bestowed upon him by Utaris, while Ron was using the divine power of death that he had painstakingly cultivated. The difference between the two was obvious. Klein bit his lip until it bled. He never thought that he would fall under Ron's death domain once again. His mind was greatly shaken, and his spatial divine power collapsed. Boom! Finally, after a violent spatial tremor, Klein's figure slowly staggered. A trace of blood appeared at the corner of his mouth, quietly floating in the air. It was a ghastly sight. Ron won. Homelin smiled faintly. At this moment, he finally let out a sigh of relief, while the people of the Scourge Church cheered. Klein understood that he had lost once again. He had lost so thoroughly. Even if he used the spatial divine power bestowed upon him by the god of space, he still suffered a crushing defeat. Klein calmly looked at Ron's figure in the void, his eyes emitting a bone-piercing hatred. He hated the same necromancer, but Ron's strength was far above his. How is this possible? He was only a human, my noble race of the undead, in the cultivation of necromancy. How could I not be as good as a human? No, I won't lose. My noble race of the undead. How could I lose to a human? In an instant, Klein's face turned sinister. Ha ha, Ron, do you think you've won? You ha ha, I lost. But you must die. Just when everyone thought that the battle was over, Klein laughed wildly. His left hand grasped the void, and the last trace of spatial divine power blasted into the sky. Boom! With a loud bang, a large hole suddenly appeared in the pitch-black sky. A white figure slowly descended from the whirlpool that was constantly spinning. It was a middle-aged man with a dignified appearance. His whole body exuded an overbearing aura. He wore a straight white formal robe with golden tassels hanging on his shoulders. The hem of his tuxedo hung down to his knees, and he wore a pair of tall black boots. He looked extremely valiant. Who is he? Suddenly seeing this human man, everyone from the Scourge Church was stunned and asked each other. Ron's nerves were even more tense. Eudelis did not reveal his body and restrained most of his power. At this moment, he looked just like an ordinary human. After he descended above Pompey's city, his divine sense swept around, and the corners of his mouth curved slightly. Klein, my dear son, why did you summon me? Is there a reason? The Sky Dragon, who had transformed into a human, had his hands behind his back. He smiled slightly with an arrogant face and slowly opened his mouth, as if he did not put anyone in his eyes. Son? He is Eudelis. Everyone's hearts rumbled, as if a thunderbolt had flashed. Of course, they had heard of the name Eudelis. In the center of all the major cities of the Noah continent stood huge statues of the sky dragon, but this was the first time they had seen a sky dragon in human form. Who was Eudelis? He was a divine beast. To be exact, he was a god. Although he belonged to the category of magical beasts, his power was comparable to that of a god. Seeing Eudelis appear, everyone's hearts sank to the bottom in an instant. No matter how strong Ron was, he was still immortal. The person in front of them was a real god. God. This was a god, a supreme god. He controlled the law of space and controlled the life and death of everyone. Compared to Eudelis, the divine power of space that Klein used was not worth mentioning at all. After the battle between Eudelis and Noah, although he defeated Noah, he was seriously injured. At present, he was hiding in a space somewhere in the Noah continent to recover from his injuries. After receiving Klein's summon, he hurried over. Eudelis used the law of space. No matter where he was, he only needed a thought to penetrate space and appear in front of everyone. Yes, Father. At this time, Klein took a few deep breaths, and his pale face flushed red. He bowed deeply. Originally, your son did not want to disturb you, Father. But now, Klein urgently needs your strength. At this point, Klein's gaze gradually moved downwards. When it fell on Ron's face, a strong killing intent suddenly flashed in his eyes. Kill Ron. A murderous aura filled the entire city, as if even the wind had stopped. Millions of undead were silent, waiting for the order of the summoner. Oh! Eudelis followed Klein's gaze, and when it fell on Ron, he could not help but be startled. Undead? Yes, divine magus necromancer. Klein clenched his teeth and looked at Ron with intense jealousy in his eyes. This guy is very strong. Even someone as strong as Klein had to admit that Ron was much stronger than him. If Ron was only a little stronger than him in the last battle, the current Ron was more than twice as strong as him. He had already stepped into another realm, a realm that even Klein had not stepped into. Eudelis sneered. He's just a divine realm expert. No matter how strong a divine realm expert is, he can't compare to a high and mighty god. Father will take care of him for you. For Eudelis, killing a divine realm expert was easier than crushing an ant. He had even killed Noah, so how could a mere necromancer do it? Therefore, Eudelis did not need to talk nonsense with Ron. He was just a divine realm expert, so he could just kill him. As for the others, he simply ignored them. Ron's expression changed. What should come would come. He clenched his fists, the fighting intent in his eyes not diminishing in the slightest as he sneered. God? Let me see the so-called power of God. Eudelis clasped his hands behind his back, a smile still hanging on his face, but the killing intent between his eyebrows gradually condensed. At this time, Ron only felt his breathing stop. The surrounding space began to distort, and his movements became slow. What? By the time Ron reacted, it was already too late. He saw a sphere condense around him, isolating space. Eudelis had the ability to control space, so he did not need to do anything. The power of space he controlled covered the sky and pressed down on Ron. Boom, boom, boom. Space began to collapse, as if the whole world had been turned upside down. Countless space fragments constantly pressed down on Ron, and the powerful pressure could crush hard rocks in a powder. Between heaven and earth, divine power fluctuated, and huge cracks appeared, constantly shining in the night sky. The high undead around Ron, whether it was the Frost Dragon or the Skeleton Emperor, all turned into a cloud of smoke and disappeared under this huge force. Divine power was the law, and the law was divine power. This was what Ron had comprehended in Bartlow's prison. Eudelis manipulated the powerful law of space and transformed it into a terrifying force, crushing Ron in a breath. In the face of Eutalis's terrifying power, Ron's expression remained calm. God is really powerful. If I were me a few months ago, I would have been helpless against Eudelis, but now, death and withering. Ron's eyes suddenly flashed with a bright light. Powerful death divine power came out of his body, forming a powerful magnetic field that resisted Eutalus's space divine power. A powerful corrosive aura penetrated space, and under the constant devastation of the death divine power, the space created by Eutalus's divine power exploded in an instant. The two powerful forces collided, and for a moment, a terrifying force spread out, turning into a powerful shock wave that swept across the area. How is this possible? This time, not only Klein, but even Eudelis was a little shocked. An ordinary powerhouse of the realm of the gods could actually resist the power of a god. No matter how strong a powerhouse of the realm of the gods was, they were still mortals. How could they compare to a god? How is this possible? Ron, he actually has the power to match Lord Eudelis. Klein's hands and feet were cold, and his body trembled violently. He looked at Ron with jealousy, unwillingness, and fear. Why? Why did he become so powerful? Why? On the other side, the people of the Scourge Church once again had hope in their hearts. Eutalus's expression became grave, and a trace of shock flashed in his eyes. He asked in a deep voice, "Who the hell are you?" "Me? Who?" Hearing this, Ron laughed. "Eudelis, I know you are a high and mighty god with the power to destroy everything." Chapter 833. What? Everyone was stunned. Even Eutaris was stunned. But looking at Ron's confident appearance, it didn't seem like he was bluffing, especially when Eutaris used his spatial divine power just now. Not to mention Eutaris, who was over 100,000 years old. Even Klein was several thousand years old. But how old was Ron? Ron was a human who didn't have extraordinary talent or a long lifespan. He was only around 30 years old, yet he had become a god? Even Klein was surprised and doubtful. Ron had really become a god? How was this possible? How old was this guy? That's right, Ron had indeed broken through. While in Bartlow's prison, Ron had sensed the danger of the Noah continent. When he defeated Klein and wanted to return to the Noah continent, he discovered that the entire Noah continent had been sealed off by a power. Needless to say, this was Eutaris's masterpiece. With his spatial divine power, sealing off a secondary plane wasn't very difficult for him. This sealing power was extremely powerful, leaving Ron helpless. At this time, he immediately calmed down and focused on cultivation. This way, he had an unexpected harvest. After comprehending the mysteries of life and death and controlling the laws of death, Ron's mental realm had taken a qualitative leap. Now, he could use the divine power of death as he wished without the blessing of another god. Gods were 1 in 10,000, and even a secondary plane might not be able to produce a god. The birth of a god required all kinds of conditions, and even an entire secondary plane couldn't meet these conditions. What a god focused on was the improvement of one's realm and the control of laws. When a kind of power reached the limit, it would turn into a law, and if one could control this law, they could become a god. After talking with Klein, Ron was suddenly enlightened. After concentrating on cultivation, in just a few short months, he surpassed his original strength and reached a realm that even Klein couldn't reach. That was a deity that controlled the laws. With this power, the confident Ron easily broke through the spatial seal and returned to the Noah continent. You've really become a god? The god of death who controls the laws of death? Klein clenched his teeth as his blood-red eyes stared at Ron. Anger, unwillingness, jealousy, and all sorts of expressions appeared on his face, making his face look particularly ferocious. Ron smiled. Of course. Why else do you think I would appear here? No, that's impossible. You are a human, a lowly human. How can a lowly creature like a human reach this level? Impossible. Klein screamed like a madman. He simply couldn't accept this reality. A few months ago, Ron's strength was inferior to his. But now, not only had he surpassed him, but he had also left him far behind. How could the proud and arrogant Klein accept this? Great Elder, Ron really became a deity. Looking at the calm Ron in the sky, Kadena asked in surprise and doubt. Hamelin hesitated. Perhaps. I'm not too sure. Apart from the Lich King, I haven't seen any other deities. Behind Kadena, Syed gently pulled on the corner of his sister's clothes and asked in a low voice, "Sister, what's a deity? Can it be eaten?" Isis rolled her eyes at him. "You don't believe me?" At this time, Ron smiled. He slowly lowered his hands and suddenly clenched them. Then his whole body began to twitch. Pung! Pung! In an instant, a black fog erupted from Ron's body. This strange black fog filled the surrounding space and formed a powerful barrier. In the black fog, countless gray phantoms danced in the wind. Those ferocious skulls were the terrifying undead. These undead let out mournful cries, which were particularly strange in the dark night sky. Divine power. Divine power of death. Utaris's expression changed. He clearly felt the vast and strange power on Ron's body dominated the law of death. It was constantly eroding this space as if it was showing off its territory. Even Utaris put away his relaxed expression. This was no longer as simple as a deity crushing an ant, but a battle between two deities. Utaris's expression was very grave. Utaris quietly looked at Ron's face. Ron's face seemed to have turned into a ferocious skull mask and overlapped with that person's appearance. It was a figure that Utaris was very familiar with and in awe of. He used the divine power of death and was a hero who made the entire main plane tremble in fear. Divine power of death. Hermes. Utaris's whole body tensed up like a leopard, choosing a person to devour. At this time, he growled. Roar. A huge figure revealed its true form in the sky above Pompeii city. Its huge body shrouded the sky, and its 6 huge wings covered the entire city like an umbrella. Its terrifying power filled the heavens and earth, causing all creatures to tremble. Utaris had transformed into his true form. The huge sky dragon kept roaring in the sky, and a great battle was about to break out. You're here. Very good. His hands gradually clenched, and Ron's face drew a strange smile. The green soul fire burned in his eyes, and the angry undead let out a terrifying roar. This was not an ordinary battle, but a showdown between two deities. Their bet was the continent of Noah. The winner would win everything. The loser would lose everything. Death's hand. The strange hand formed by the black fog suddenly stretched out. At this moment, Ron took the initiative to attack. Powerful, terrifying, and strange divine power of death erupted, as if a demon from hell had stretched out a huge claw. Spatial blade. Compared to Ron, Sky Dragon Utaris had no reason to retreat. He was a super divine beast that had been famous for a long time. How could he bow his head to a human who had just become a god? Countless spatial blades spread out, forming a huge long blade. The long blade was so powerful that even the world shook. Not good. Be careful. In an instant, Kay screamed crazily. She clearly felt how powerful the aftermath of the collision of the two terrifying forces was. Just as she was at her wit's end, Hamelin made a timely move. Bone wall. In the blink of an eye, a solid bone wall formed from countless bones rose from the ground, enveloping everyone within. Boom! Death God Force and Space God Force collided, and a powerful shockwave spread out. Countless spatial blades swept out in all directions, carrying with them a black, corrosive energy. Everywhere they went, there was a zzz sound. Houses, trees, everything was turned to ashes by this terrifying, corrosive energy. Crash! La! La! As if after a storm, the whole of Pompeii city was in a mess, and the sound of gravel sliding could be heard everywhere. Phew! Everyone breathed a sigh of relief and looked at Hamelin gratefully. Thank you. Great Elder, no need to thank me. As soon as Malin said this, he was stunned. He saw that half of Pompeii city had been turned into ruins. Even the wall of bones that he had summoned had become thousands of years old. It was like a dilapidated house that was on the verge of collapse. Chapter 834. Haha. At this time, Utaris, who had been cautious all this time, suddenly burst into laughter. I was almost fooled by you, kid. You're not a god at all. You're just bluffing. Hearing Utaris's words, Ron was startled at first, but then he smiled disapprovingly. Utaris, are you out of your mind? I control the laws and can freely use the divine power of death. How is that not a god? Ron paused, and his eyes flashed with a glimmer of light. The current me is unprecedentedly powerful. Whether I'm a god or not, it doesn't matter. What matters is that I can defeat you. Utaris, if you want to use words to break my confidence, then you've got the wrong idea. When Utaris said this, not to mention the people of the Scourge Church, even Klein did not believe it. The current Ron, even if he could not defeat Utaris, was strong enough to compete with him. As Ron said, Utaris only wanted to break Ron's fighting spirit. It was not that Ron did not know Utaris' strength. If he was not sure, he would not have come to know a continent to die. Huh? Utaris laughed, shook his head, and said, Ron, do you think I'm lying to you? I'm a dignified sky dragon. There's no need for me to do such a thing. That's right. You do control the laws of death and can freely use the divine power of death. However, if you want to become a true god, you still lack one thing. Godhood. That's godhood. Utaris smiled faintly and said slowly, Don't worry. The laws are only one kind of divine power. As long as you simplify the divine power and condense it into godhood, you will be a true god. Ron's heart skipped a beat, and he was bewildered. Could it be that what he said was true? Although he had doubts in his heart, Ron did not show it on his face. He only snorted coldly. It doesn't matter whether I'm a god or not. It doesn't matter whether I have godhood or not. What matters is that my strength is enough to defeat you. That's enough. You are wrong again. Utaris smiled sinisterly. The difference in strength between the two is too great. With a godhead, that's a true god. Without a godhead, that's just a divine realm expert who can use the power of laws. Many divine realm experts are stuck at this step, unable to break through for the rest of their lives. Although you don't have a godhead yet, your strength is infinitely close to that of God. One day, you will condense a godhead and become a true god. Utalis faintly smiled as killing intent appeared in his eyes, but I won't let you see that day. Now, I'll show you the power of a true god with a divine spark. Utaris truly wanted to kill Ron. Ron was simply too young. As long as he had enough time, he could even become another Lich King, standing at the peak and looking down on all living things. Utaris wouldn't let this happen. The current Ron had to die. Following Utaris's low roar, an enormous pressure of divine power swept towards Ron. This time, he did not hold back, and his first move was a real killing blow. Shatter Space. A huge black sphere trapped Ron, and then space began to collapse. Countless fragments flew out and turned into a myriad of blades that attacked Ron. In Ron's eyes, it was as if the entire world was being torn apart. This was the space created by Utaris. Within this space, Utaris controlled the laws and became an invincible existence. This was his domain, the domain of divinity. Come! Ron's eyes blazed with fighting intent. Since this is the case, let the battle become even fiercer. Death Space. At this time, Ron made his move. He opened the 7th chapter of the Book of Death, the Death Space, and terrifying death divine energy continuously gushed out. The two divine energies collided and burst out with a dazzling brilliance, igniting even the sky. At this moment, Ron's body was surrounded by countless specters, and his eyes had turned into a faint green color. A huge skull phantom appeared in the air, looking extremely strange. At this time, Ron's heart shook and his eyes filled with alarm. How could this be? Space divine energy and death divine energy collided, and the latter immediately collapsed. Utaris's power easily destroyed Ron's domain of death. Not good. Ron immediately had a bad feeling. He did his utmost to stimulate his death divine energy, intending to contend against Utaris. Unfortunately, his power was too weak. They were both using divine energy, but Ron's death divine energy and Utaris's space divine energy were like a child competing with an adult. Boundless divine power of space surged forth like a tidal wave, instantly devouring all of Ron's divine power of death. At this time, Ron heard Utaris's thunderous voice. "Ron, look carefully. This is a godhead, the formidable power of a true god." "Impossible! Impossible!" Ron's heart was dripping blood. He had already become a god, but he didn't expect this to be the result of his battle with Utaris. Rumble. As if the world was spinning, Ron's mind went blank. Through Utaris's sea of consciousness, he saw a black ball-like thing that was constantly rotating and emitting a huge amount of space divine energy. Godhead. This is a godhead. Ron was greatly shaken. He finally realized that Utaris wasn't lying. Every god had their own godhead that protected their soul. Although the godhead was small, its defensive power was very strong. No matter how hard Ron tried, he couldn't penetrate it and attack Utaris's soul. Utaris was naturally aware of Ron's little trick. He faintly smiled and said, "Kid, you want to attack my soul? Ha ha! Give up. You won't have the chance." "So, I'm not a god. I was too naive." A self-deprecating look flashed in Ron's eyes. He knew that he was finished. Ron is finished. Standing in the rubble, Hamelin couldn't bear to look anymore. He closed his eyes in pain, and turbid tears slowly flowed down his cheeks. At this point in the battle, there was no suspense about the outcome. A realm of the gods' powerhouse who only controlled the power of laws was simply no match for a god. Ron was defeated. Countless fragments burst out from the shattered space and constantly cut Ron's body. In just an instant, Ron's fragile body endured hundreds of millions of attacks. Shattered space. This was a divine skill used to deal with Noah. Utaris used it on Ron. Ron's strength was inferior to Noah's, so his defeat was already destined. How could this be? Ron looked at his hand in disbelief, only to see his hand turn into a cloud of smoke and disappear. He could feel his body constantly melting and turning into dust. Chapter 835. Ron, it's over. Hamelin couldn't bear to watch anymore. He closed his eyes in pain, and muddy tears slowly flowed down his cheeks. Ron. Sorrowful cries and the heart-wrenching cries of the women came from the night sky. At this point in the battle, there was no suspense about the outcome of the battle. An expert from the domain of the gods who had only mastered the power of rules was no match for a god. Billions of fragments burst out from the shattered space, and these fragments constantly cut Ron's body. In just a moment, Ron's fragile body suffered countless attacks. How? How could this be? Ron looked at his body in disbelief. He could feel his body constantly melting, turning into dust, and slowly disappearing. Am I going to die? Asterisk is not equal to small asterisk, say I. I really don't want to. Godhood. What is godhood? I have already mastered the power of rules, so why can't I have it? Ron's heart was full of confusion, unwillingness, and grief, but now he was powerless. Minter Hamelin, I failed to live up to your teachings. Kadena, Aurora, Delin, Becerra, Isis, and the children I haven't met yet. I'm sorry. I've done my best. After saying this, Ron's eyes dimmed, and he lost consciousness. Ron was dead. Utaris had killed his body and destroyed his soul. The battle between a god and an expert from the domain of the gods had finally come to an end. Ron's soul drifted unconsciously with the wind. He could see the broken walls of Pompeii City, the dazed Minter Hamelin, the furious Kay, and the grief-stricken Kadena, Becerra, and the others. He also saw the small figure of Saya in the crowd. This little boy, only 7 or 8 years old, clenched his fists tightly, and his eyes shot out the anger of revenge. He also saw the ferocious soldiers of the Red Silk Army surround these people and put them back into the dungeon under the command of Klein. However, Ron was powerless against all of this. His body had already shattered, and his soul had dispersed. Everything in front of him was getting further and further away. He wanted to shout. He wanted to scream, but he realized that he couldn't make a single sound. His body was involuntarily flying upwards, drifting further and further away. It was located in the southern forest of the Noah continent. Towering trees covered the sky, and the ground was covered with a thick layer of leaves. No one knew how long it had been since someone came here. A small path could be vaguely seen, and in this remote, primitive forest, a house made of stone stood out. The exterior of the house looked like a church, but it wasn't. The tall spire, the semicircular arches, and the windows that had long lost their edges gave off a gloomy atmosphere. This building had been around for a long time, and the mottled exterior walls were already covered in moss. In this small house, an old woman wearing a silver-gray robe and a face full of wrinkles, like a savage, sat upright. Her stooped figure was slightly trembling in the small house. The old woman raised her head, her turbid eyes filled with hope, as if she was waiting for something. At this time, the oil lamp in the corner of the room suddenly burst into flames without warning. The silver-gray old woman was startled. When she turned her head and saw the faintly pulsing blue soul fire, she was first stunned, and then her eyes revealed a look of ecstasy. She immediately stood up and rushed over. Looking at the small thing that looked like an oil lamp, her lips trembled, and tears slowly flowed down her cheeks. "Ron, you're finally here." 3 hours after the battle ended, the sky was already bright. Utaris received Klein in a ruined room in the Imperial Palace. "Father, your injuries have healed." As soon as Klein entered the room, he immediately bowed. Utaris softly grunted, but did not comment. At this time, he stared at Klein with a sharp gaze. "Klein, as my son, you really disappoint me." Klein was startled and immediately knelt down. "I'm sorry, Father. Your son wasn't able to defeat Ron and caused you trouble." "It's not about that." Utaris angrily waved his hand. "I asked you, how was the matter of the key?" Klein raised his head in astonishment, not daring to look at Utaris's angry gaze. I haven't found Mary yet." "Who wants you to find Mary?" "I want the key to the lost continent." Utaris roared angrily, his tone unprecedentedly harsh. "I don't ask you about the process. I only want the result." "The result, do you know?" Utaris angrily slapped the table, causing the cups on the table to jump. Klein jumped in fright. Cold sweat trickled down his back with a swoosh sound. I know. Father, I'll go look for it. Right away." Klein immediately retreated. He wanted to find the key to the lost continent. He had to find it immediately. If he couldn't find it, Utaris wouldn't spare him. 3 days. When Klein retreated to the door, Utaris's cold and emotionless voice came from behind him. "Klein, if you can't find the key within 3 days, you don't have to come back. Disappear with Ron." Upon hearing this, Klein staggered and nearly fell. His eyes revealed a look of resentment. After all, he had personally rescued Utaris from Bartolo's prison. Now that he was no longer of any use to him, he had been kicked away. Thinking of this, Klein's heart was filled with sorrow. If he had known this would happen, he wouldn't have been so busy. Not only had he betrayed his faith, but he had also almost lost his life. Although he was strangely angry, Klein did not show it on his face. He turned slightly and bowed deeply, his face full of humility. "Yes, Father, I will definitely find the key. I won't let you down." With that, he turned and left. "Damn undead." After Klein left, Utaris looked at his back and snorted coldly. It wasn't that he didn't see the flash of resentment on Klein's face, but for a high and mighty god like him, there was no need to care. What Utaris cared about was whether this Klein was still useful to him. If not, then there was no use in keeping this guy. If he can't find the key, Utaris snorted coldly and muttered to himself, the killing intent in his eyes growing stronger. After an unknown period of time, Ron faintly opened his eyes. Reflected in his eyes was the face of an old woman covered in wrinkles. The old woman looked at him quietly, her expression full of concern. "You're awake." Ron was startled and got up with a roll. Only then did he realize that he was lying on a bed with a thin quilt covering his body. Ron took a few deep breaths, before coming back to his senses. He looked at the old woman gratefully. "Did you save me?" The old woman smiled and did not answer Ron's question. Ron shook his dizzy head. At this time, he saw that the old woman's face was somewhat familiar. A thought flashed through his mind, and he blurted out a sentence. Chapter 836. Mary. Klein had searched the entire Noah continent for Mary, and now she was standing in front of Ron, alive and well. What made him even more puzzled was that he had clearly been killed by Utaris, yet he had inexplicably come back to life and appeared in a small house in the far south of the Noah continent. Thank you. In any case, one thing was clear. This woman named Mary had saved him. Ron got out of bed and sincerely thanked Mary. "No need to thank me." Mary smiled and waved her hand. "The one who saved you wasn't me, but Lord Noah." "Lord Noah?" Ron raised his head, his eyes filled with astonishment. "You mean Lord Noah saved me? He's not dead yet?" When Noah died, Ron, who was far away in Bartlow's prison, also sensed it. Although he did not know the details, Noah's aura had disappeared. Did he come back to life like me? Thinking of this, Ron was both surprised and delighted. If Lord Noah was not dead, then the Noah continent could be saved. Although Utaris was a god, Lord Noah was also a god. Lord Noah is dead. As if she had seen through Ron's thoughts, Mary shook her head and replied with an extremely pained expression on her face. Even if Lord Noah is still alive, he can't fight against Utaris. Utaris is too powerful, and Lord Noah was killed by him. Ron's entire body trembled, and his face turned deathly pale with a whoosh sound. His mouth was filled with bitterness. "So that's how it is," I thought. The two sighed in unison and looked gloomy. At this time, Ron slowly sorted out some of his thoughts and frowned. "Lord Noah is already dead. So how did he save me? And why are you here?" Mary smiled. "Do you still remember that cross of rebirth?" "Cross of rebirth?" Ron shuddered violently. It was as if a box of memories had been opened, and he recalled the past scene after scene. "Ron, if you really have the money, then buy this." Homelin pointed at the cross of rebirth and said to Ron, "I want it." Ron said to Mary, "Are you sure? You don't want the holy relic anymore?" Mary chuckled. "No. So, it was it that saved me." Ron murmured. He reached out his hand to touch his neck, but found nothing. The cross of rebirth that he had been wearing around his neck had long since disappeared. The cross of rebirth can give you a second life, provided that the damage to your body doesn't exceed 80%. However, you're a necromancer, so this shouldn't be a problem. However, you can only use it once. After using it, the cross of rebirth will disappear forever. Mary smiled, but there was a hint of disappointment in her eyes. This was originally something that belonged to Lord Noah. He didn't need it himself, so he gave it to me. In the end, you bought it. Perhaps this is fate. Ron's eyes became slightly moist as he listened. If Lord Noah had this thing on him back then, perhaps he wouldn't have died or even come back to life. Mary was right. It was indeed Lord Noah who saved me, or rather, he sacrificed his own life to give me a chance to come back to life. Mary gently wiped the corners of her eyes. Sigh. "Ron, you don't have to blame yourself. Even if Lord Noah had the cross of rebirth and obtained a second life, he still wouldn't have been a match for Utalis. Perhaps Lord Noah leaving the cross of rebirth to you would have been a better choice." A better choice? Ron carefully chewed on these words. He felt that Mary's words had another meaning. At this moment, he suddenly trembled. "What? You mean I can defeat Utalis?" "Yes." Mary nodded, her tone resolute and unquestionable. Ron didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Miss Mary, are you sure you're not joking with me?" Ron, who had fought with Utalis before, undoubtedly knew how terrifying Utalis' strength was. It could even be said that besides the dead Noah, no one in the entire continent understood how terrifying Utalis was better than Ron. Ron, who had already comprehended the law of death and was familiar with controlling the divine power of death, had been defeated in an instant. The terrifying power that had appeared in Utalis' mind and protected his soul was still fresh in his memory. Now that he heard that even Lord Noah wasn't a match for Eudalis, how could he? I'm not joking. Even Lord Noah thinks that you can do it, so he left the cross of rebirth to you. Mary earnestly said, more importantly, you are the appointed successor of the Lich King, Hermes. As long as the undead don't die, the calamities don't die. This edict that has been passed down for 100,000 years should be with you. As Mary spoke, she slowly closed her eyes. The room returned to silence, and only the light breathing of the two could be heard. Ron's mouth was wide open, and he stood there like an idiot. He was dumbfounded, completely dumbfounded. His mind couldn't digest these things for a while. I am the appointed successor of the Lich King. The edict of the undead calamity should be with me? Ron stammered, his face paling even more. Of course, Mary said with a serious expression. Who would have thought that the ancient undead magic that had disappeared for 100,000 years would reappear in this world? An ordinary youth from an Noah continent would actually be able to grasp the undead magic that was popular in the previous continent. Amros? All of this, could it be the will of the heavens? Or is this the arrangement of fate? No. There's only one answer. The deceased Lich King, Hermes, is secretly protecting all of this, and you are his successor. Ron opened his mouth, but didn't say anything. It was an accident that he learned undead magic. If it wasn't for the ring that the deceased Grandpa Zari picked up and gave it to him, he wouldn't have met Hamelin and wouldn't have learned undead magic. But afterwards, he trained undead magic step by step to the peak and rebuilt the Scourge Church, allowing undead magic to regain its former glory in the Amros continent. All of this wasn't something that he could explain. Could it be that the Lich King really is secretly protecting me, just because I'm his successor? Ron thought to himself. At this moment, the corner of Mary's mouth curved up slightly. Actually, the most important thing is that the rumored shattered primary plane that fell into the hands of the Lich King is in your hands. What? Ron was shocked. The shattered primary plane is in my hands? What does this mean? It's the ring in your hand. Mary laughed and pointed at the soul ring in Ron's hand. Don't look down on this little thing in your hand. Utaris did everything he could, even turning the entire Noah continent upside down to find me. His goal was to obtain this little thing. Although this ring is small, it seals a primary plane. It's the only gift that the Lich King, Hermes, left for his successor. I'm his successor? Ron slowly recovered from his shock and muttered. That's right. All the evidence points to you, Ron, being the successor of the Lich King, Hermes. Ron's breathing became hurried. He thought about it. When his soul entered the soul ring, it was as if he had returned home. He could even see the face of the Lich King, as well as his remaining consciousness. Chapter 837. Lord Noah. Trust me, Ron muttered as if he was talking to himself. Slowly, a trace of red appeared on his pale face, and the confusion in his eyes disappeared. Instead, it was replaced by a face of confidence and calmness. Utaris is indeed very powerful. Ron's expression returned to normal as he admitted honestly, but since Lord Noah trusts me, I can definitely do it. Mary, tell me what to do. Looking at Ron's confident gaze, Mary smiled in satisfaction. Very good. Lord Lich King didn't misjudge you. Lord Noah also didn't misjudge you. Ron, please follow me. Ron nodded heavily and followed Mary into the room. At this moment, he was like a completely different person compared to before. The room was pitch black and nothing could be seen. Ron used the necromancy spell Dark Spirit Vision to see some things clearly in the darkness. This was a relatively large room, and it seemed that no one had cleaned it for a long time. The walls were covered with dust, and the ceiling was covered with cobwebs. There were also several palm-sized spiders crawling around. A lizard ran out from a corner, caught a spider, and swallowed it down with a smack-smack sound. Mary calmly walked to the center of the room and gently blew away the dust on the table. She lifted a piece of cloth and revealed a white, translucent object. Ron focused his eyes and saw that the object covered by the cloth was actually a crystal ball. Mary placed both hands on the crystal ball and chanted an incantation. A trace of blue light shot out from the crystal ball and illuminated the entire room. Kacha! Kacha! The entire room seemed to come alive as it trembled slightly. An enormous power began to circulate, and countless rays of light shot toward the crystal ball that Mary was in. O.M. The dust falling from the ceiling covered Ron's face. The small animals had long since run off to who knows where. An enormous power gathered in the room. Ron no longer had the time to worry about whether or not this shabby room would collapse. He stared closely at Mary's actions with a nervous expression. Finally, the power reached a critical point, and a circle of light with a diameter of 3 meters appeared. When this circle of light appeared, the crystal ball in Mary's hand suddenly exploded, and the crystals scattered all over the floor. As the power within the crystal ball disappeared, the room became dim as if it had lost its life. Only the circle of light was left floating in the air and constantly rotating. "What is this?" Ron frowned and asked. "It looks like a spatial tunnel." "That's right. This is indeed a spatial tunnel." Mary smiled, "But it's a one-time use. It's useless once it's opened." Ron took a deep breath. "You mean you want me to go in?" "Yes." Mary moved slightly to the side and opened up a path. "Ron, go in. There's what you want, and the answer you've been searching for. The answer I've been looking for." A trace of passion suddenly appeared in Ron's eyes. He nodded slightly and slowly walked into the circle of light. Rumble! A loud sound was heard. Ron only felt his vision darken. The next moment, he found himself in another space. The circle of light disappeared, and everything returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. Mary quietly sat down and muttered to herself, "Lord Noah, I've completed the mission you gave me. Ron, it's up to you now. The Noah continent. I'll leave it to you." After calmly saying this, a strange smile appeared on Mary's face. At this moment, a cold light suddenly flashed in her hand. It was a sharp dagger. In an instant, that sharp dagger sank into Mary's abdomen. A trace of pain appeared on Mary's face, and her eyes slowly dimmed. A trace of blood flowed down from the corner of her mouth as she spoke in a soft voice. "Lord Noah, wait for me." In a room of a small house in the southern forest, an old human woman silently sat on the ground. A sharp dagger was deeply embedded in her abdomen. Her eyes were tightly shut, and although there was a trace of pain on her face, a satisfied smile hung on the corner of her mouth. Mary was dead. She was an orphan who had been taken in by Noah since she was young and had served him for her entire life. Ever since Noah died, her heart had also died. The only reason she was still alive was because of that unfinished mission. A fierce cold wind blew past Ron's ears. Snow covered everything as far as his eyes could see. It was a world of white and filled with a deathly stillness. The rapidly decreasing temperature caused even someone as strong as Ron to feel a bone-chilling chill. Where is this? Where am I? Ron stood there silently, with a blank expression on his face. At this moment, he was standing in a boundless snowy plain with thick snow under his feet. Mary had let Ron enter this strange spatial passage, but she didn't tell him where to go. Perhaps even she didn't know. "You have finally come." Just as Ron was at a loss, he heard a sigh, followed by a thunderous voice. "Who is it? Who is there calling me?" Ron was startled. With his strength, it was impossible for him to not notice an enemy approaching him. However, when he released his spiritual sense and looked around, he couldn't find a single person. No one. Impossible. I clearly heard a voice just now. Could it be an illusion? Ron became nervous and vigilantly looked around. He also tightly gripped the dragonbone staff in his hand, his palms sweating. However, the only response he got was the whistling of the cold wind. There was no movement. Could it be that I really misheard? Ron was bewildered. At this moment, that thunderous voice sounded again. "Come here." This time, Ron heard it clearly. This wasn't a real voice, but it came from his soul. It was as if it was directly communicating with Ron's soul. This voice was very familiar to him. It had a commanding tone, and there was a hint of dignity in it. This voice, where did he hear it before? Ron took a deep breath. He couldn't help but walk in the direction of the voice. In the boundless land of ice and snow, it was impossible to distinguish north from south. Ron didn't know why he was walking in that direction. It was as if there was something there that was attracting him. At this moment, through the wind and snow, he saw a ray of light not far away. The white light was especially dazzling in this land of ice and snow. It was like a bright lamp guiding Ron in the direction he was going. It's over there. Perhaps it was a kind of intuition, but Ron knew that the voice in his mind was coming from that strange light. Strangely, in this land of ice and snow, Ron's powers seemed to be suppressed. He couldn't fly and could only obediently walk forward step by step. His boots were already soaked in the snow, and his feet were already numb from the cold. His thick black robe couldn't block the whistling cold wind. Time seemed to have stopped. The world was covered in a vast expanse of white. On this boundless land of ice and snow, there was only a black silhouette walking forward. Every step seemed incomparably difficult. Closer, closer. After an unknown amount of time, Ron finally arrived in the vicinity of that light. The source of the light was a huge ice mountain. He was already standing at the foot of that huge ice mountain. This ice mountain was conical in shape and was several hundred meters tall. At the peak of this ice mountain, a vague silhouette could be seen. You're finally here. A sigh sounded in Ron's mind. He raised his head, and in an instant, it was as if he'd been struck by lightning. His entire body trembled, and his face was full of excitement and respect. Lord, Lich King. Although Ron had never seen the Lich King before, he could already recognize the other party at a glance. This mighty figure who had appeared in his dreams countless times was the Lich King. At that moment, the Lich King was wearing heavy armor that was airtight. He wore a skull mask on his face, and his chest, shoulders, knees, and other places were carved with skull ornaments. His tall and valiant body was sitting upright on a huge throne at the top of this ice mountain. He was like an emperor who ruled over the world as he looked disdainfully down at the earth beneath his feet. The person sitting upright on the throne had long lost all signs of life. Ling Ling was just a corpse, a belief, a symbol. However, his power and majesty had already enveloped every corner of the world. In front of him, even powerful gods seemed to pale in comparison. The Lich King had died, but his faith, his spirit, and his prestige had become a great legend that shook the world. Even though he had died, he was still full of dignity and was revered by tens of thousands of people. Even his enemies would tremble in fear. Chapter 838. Ron silently looked at the giant throne on top of the ice mountain. His heart was filled with incomparable respect and reverence. In front of this giant that looked down on the world, Ron felt that he was very small. 23WX. Just like the Sky Dragon, the Lich King was also a true god. The Sky Dragon gave Ron the feeling of power and dominance, but the Lich King gave him the feeling of reverence and respect. This made Ron feel an inexplicable urge to kneel down and worship him. The eyes of the king on the ice mountain lit up, and a trace of green light appeared. Immediately afterwards, a powerful divine sense swept towards Ron. Suddenly, Ron felt as if his entire body had been seen through. In front of this giant, he held nothing back. Child, your strength isn't very strong, but considering your age, it's not bad. The Lich King on the frozen throne withdrew his gaze. A wave of soul energy was transmitted over, confirming Ron's strength. In reality, Ron was quite confident in his own strength. Apart from being unable to defeat the Sky Dragon, he was far stronger than other experts in the divine realm. After controlling the law of death, he thought that he had become a god, or at least infinitely close to becoming one. With this kind of strength, the Lich King could only give him a not bad evaluation. It was easy to imagine just how strong the Lich King was. Ron took a few deep breaths and calmed his excited heart. He gathered his courage and asked, Lord, Lich King, could it be that you're really dead? The Lich King's eyes under the mask lit up. He asked back, "What do you think?" Ron didn't feel a trace of life from this giant. From his judgment as a necromancer, the Lich King was truly dead. What was left was just a remnant of his soul. It could even be said that it was just a remnant of his consciousness. This remnant of his consciousness wasn't the same as his soul. If the Lich King's soul still existed, the Sky Dragon wouldn't have been able to do as he pleased. Ron really wanted to say yes, but standing in front of this giant, he was a bit doubtful. Just this remnant of his soul was incomparably powerful, perhaps even stronger than the Sky Dragon. He couldn't say this and could only shake his head. "I don't know." "Huh." The Lich King laughed. "It's not that you don't know. It's just that you don't dare to say it." "Death. What is it?" As a necromancer, a researcher of the soul, it's impossible for you not to know. Death. Nothing is eternal, even if it's a god. Death. The Lich King of the Lich King's soul. Death. Death too? Ron's eyes widened. The words of this giant in front of him overturned everything he knew. He always thought that gods were immortal and had never heard that gods could die. But then again, wasn't Noah a god? He was killed by the Sky Dragon. What are gods? They're just living beings that control the power of the laws. No matter if it's humans, elves, or magical beasts, they're all living beings. Since they're living beings, even if they control the laws, who says that they can't die? Life or death. It's all process. Child, you should understand this simple logic. The Lich King guided him patiently, as if he was his teacher. He opened the door to a higher level of the laws of death for him. Ron listened carefully and didn't miss a single word, even though he still didn't understand the concept of reincarnation and process. So, what does it matter if I'm alive or dead? No matter how strong a god is, no matter how strong an army is, it will still die in the end. The Lich King's tone was so calm that it didn't have a trace of emotion. As a remnant soul, his body had already died and his soul had been destroyed. The only reason he existed was to say those words to Ron. He had indeed waited for too long. It had already been 100,000 years. Ron's mouth moved. He wanted to say something, but in the end, he didn't say anything. The giant in front of him, who had single-handedly created the glory of the Scourge, didn't need to be comforted. At this time, the Lich King's tone changed and became serious. "However, even though I'm already dead, the Scourge cannot be destroyed. Its existence is a symbol, a flag. It concerns the lives, dignity, and living space of billions of undead. As long as the undead don't die, the Scourge will not be destroyed. The flag of the Scourge will not fall because of my death. Ron, whether you're willing or not, you must take on this heavy responsibility. The Scourge is the hope of all undead." The Lich King raised his voice. The Scourge in the main plane had already been destroyed. At least, it only existed in name. The Lich King single-handedly created the glory of the Scourge. However, he also knew that the Scourge's prestige was built on the corpses of the undead and the bones of the undead, killing, conquering, massacring cities, and destroying countries. The powerful Scourge stepped into every corner of the main plane. All races and armies trembled under the blood-red skull war flag of the Scourge. The glory of the past had resulted in the disaster of today. The Lich King was a wise man. His vision pierced through the fog and saw the unknown future. He had already predicted that the decline of the Scourge would cause great turmoil in the main plane. It might even cause a reshuffle. When that time came, the undead would naturally be affected. He needed a successor, a new leader, to protect the undead in the main plane. This candidate was Ron. Ron cultivated necromancy and stood at the peak of the Noah continent. It only took him a short 10 years to unify the entire Noah continent. Without his secret support, it would not have been possible. His support was very simple and direct. He directly gave Ron power through the Soul Ring. It was only today that Ron realized that every time he was in danger, the Lich King's shadow was behind it. To a certain extent, his mentor, Hamelin, was also a chess piece that the Lich King had planted. His responsibility was to guide Ron on the path of necromancy. The biting cold wind scraped Ron's face like knives. It was bone-chilling, but at this moment his heart was warm. He slowly raised his head, his eyes shining with determination. "Respected Lich King, I, Ron, am willing to take on this heavy responsibility. I solemnly swear on my life that the Scourge will return to its former glory." "Very good." The Lich King's eyes flickered under the cold steel mask, then dimmed. "You walk up." "Yes, my king." Ron bowed deeply, then lifted his feet and walked up the steps on the ice mountain. There were a total of 9,999 steps on the ice mountain, winding up the mountain. Ron carried deep respect as he walked up the ice mountain step by step. His steps were firm and powerful. The cold wind blew up his robes, making them flutter like a black dragon. At this moment, goose feather-like snow fluttered down, covering the earth with a layer of silver. After an unknown amount of time, Ron finally walked up the 9,999 steps and arrived in front of the Lich King's frozen throne. He lowered his head deeply. "Very good." At this moment, the Lich King's eyes strangely lit up. "Wear my mask and inherit my everything." "Yes, my king." Ron bowed respectfully. He slowly walked up the last few steps of the throne and reached out his right hand. "Kacha! Kacha!" Strangely enough, Ron's hand only lightly touched the frozen throne, and the 10,000-year-old ice on the throne suddenly cracked open without any warning. The crack grew bigger and bigger. Immediately after, with a boom, the entire ice mountain shook as if it had exploded. The Lich King's body on the frozen throne cracked open, turning into thousands of ghosts. They wrapped around the ice mountain, and sharp wails shook the entire area. The Lich King broke free from the shackles of the decaying body and revealed a huge soul shadow. It quietly floated in the air and looked at Ron with a fatherly gaze. "Child, I've always watched you as you grew up day by day into a powerful undead, a great hero. Child, I also believe that you've always been cautious in using your strength. However, true strength isn't just strength. I'm telling you this because I already have a premonition that my life is about to come to an end, and you will be crowned king." Ding, ding, ding. Following a clear sound, something that seemed to be made of gold rolled down from the throne and landed in front of Ron's feet. This was an exquisite skull mask with a sinister face. It opened its bloody mouth like a ghost. Ron quietly held it in his hand and felt the boundless power of death coming from a mask. "Go, child." Noble undead, undying souls, the belief in death, the thirst for power, the loyalty to evil, the yearning to rule. Wear it, and you will be my successor, their king. Ron bowed deeply. When he straightened up, his eyes revealed a trace of determination. He took a deep breath and slowly put the Lich King's mask on his head. Boom! An earth-shattering sound rang out. In an instant, the entire world shook. Large chunks of ice fell like raindrops. The powerful divine power of death swept up the ice and snow and threw it into the air. Clouds and mist filled the sky. A pillar of light descended from the sky, entangling countless souls. They were screaming. Ron's entire body trembled. He felt the power coming from the Lich King's mask become stronger and stronger. It filled his entire consciousness. The soul in his consciousness let out a howl. He didn't know whether it was out of excitement or agitation. In the crevice of the iceberg, a small green insect was twisting its small body in pain. Suddenly, a crack appeared on its back, and a pair of beautiful, colorful wings quietly stretched out from the broken shell. In his sea of consciousness, a black ball slowly formed. It was a layer of protective membrane that surrounded his soul and became one with it. At this moment, Ron already knew that this thing was called divine deity. Ron, who possessed the divine spark of death, released its power without any hesitation. The earth cracked, the sky collapsed, and the vast world of ice and snow was like the end of the world. Boom! Boom! After an unknown amount of time, the world of ice and snow finally calmed down. Ron quietly stood in front of the frozen throne with his eyes closed. He wore the sinister and strange Lich King's mask on his face. His body was wrapped in a layer of black gas. This layer of black gas was formed by countless souls, The Lich King's sole shadow had already disappeared. He had put down the mission that he had carried on his back for 100,000 years and completely disappeared from the world. In front of the bone-chilling frozen throne, a new king stood. He was like a rising sun, shining with the luster of life. Whoosh! Without any warning, a pair of blood-red eyes opened under the terrifying mask. In an instant, they exploded with light. Chapter 839. The huge city square was filled with black heads. These people surrounded the center of the square, pointing at the people in the square. Among these people, there was the great elder of the Scourge Church, the divine necromancer Homelin, the dark dragon R.A. Firth, the elven high priestess Undine, the fairy dragon Frigga, the Beaumont behemoth Houchin and his grandson, the golden Beaumont behemoth Kay, as well as a large number of powerhouses from the divine realm and the sacred domain. These powerhouses, who were usually rarely seen, had their powers sealed. Their hands and feet were tied with ropes made of special materials. They stood on a tall gallows, and 2 soldiers of the Red Silk Army were watching them. Among these people, they were all powerhouses of the Noah continent. Because they were unwilling to surrender to Utaris, they were going to be executed today. Some of them were from the Scourge Church, while others were from the Dragons, Beaumont clan, and Elves. Even though they knew they were going to die, these people were calm, and there was no fear in their eyes. There were hundreds of thousands of soldiers of the Red Silk Army guarding the periphery of the city. They were fully armed, with red silk tied to their arms. However, there were dozens of divine realm magical beasts among them, vigilantly scanning the surroundings. On the throne of the high platform in the center of the city sat an elegant middle-aged man in a gray robe. He narrowed his eyes and quietly scanned the people below. They're all powerhouses from the divine realm, and there are many powerhouses from the sacred domain. They are so powerful, but they're going to be executed today. What a pity! Sympathy appeared in the eyes of the onlookers, but in front of the ferocious Red Silk Army soldiers, they could only whisper to each other. A beautiful 17 or 18-year-old girl squeezed into the crowd. She was a thief and wore tight black clothes. Her blonde hair was tied behind her head, and she wore a pair of delicate leather boots. Her lively eyes carefully sized up the crowd of executioners. Beside her stood a white-haired old man. Looking at his attire, he was also a thief. However, he was more low-key. Not only did he wear a mask, he also pulled down the hood of his cloak, revealing only his eyes. "Grandfather, they're all from the Scourge Church?" The young thief girl asked the old thief beside her in a low voice. She couldn't help but look away. Not only the people of the Scourge Church, but also the Dragons, the Elves, and the Beaumont clan. They refused to surrender, so they were hanged by Utaris. The old thief nodded lightly. He clenched his fists tightly, and his eyes were filled with anger. However, he soon relaxed and sighed silently. It's too abominable. Because they refuse to surrender, they're going to be hanged. There are so many people in the Noah continent who refuse to surrender to Utaris. Are they all going to be hanged? The young thief girl was somewhat angry. She forgot her grandfather's instructions and raised her voice. The old thief was shocked and immediately made a gesture to keep quiet. "Quiet. Do you want to die? There are people from the Red Silk Army here. If they report you, you will lose your life." The young thief girl came to her senses and looked around with a guilty conscience. Seeing that no one was paying attention to her, she relaxed and playfully stuck out her tongue. "If I knew this would happen, I wouldn't have brought you here. You troublemaker." The old thief sighed in relief and scolded softly, but his tone was full of doting. "I knew grandfather was the best to me." The young thief girl affectionately held onto her grandfather's arm and said with a smile. The old thief could not do anything about it. He could only roll his eyes and sigh helplessly. This old thief was none other than the dean of the Hans Academy, the one with the title of King of Assassin's Hill. The young thief girl was his granddaughter, Linner. Hill was no longer the dean of the Hans Academy. Unlike Platz, he had disbanded the academy before the Red Silk Army's attack and brought his family to escape from Balavax to live in seclusion in a secluded place. After that, the entire continent was in chaos. As a powerhouse of a sacred domain, he did not attract too much attention, so he had been living peacefully until now. Only now did he secretly come out with his granddaughter, Linner. They are really too pitiful. There is even a child who is not even 10 years old. Grandfather, can we save him? Linner's eyes were brimming with tears as she shook Hill's hand. How? Hill laughed bitterly. Not to mention the divine beast Utaris. There are dozens of powerhouses of the divine realm watching us. If I did not hide my strength, I would have been discovered by them. Save them? Impossible. Even Ron was defeated by them. Linner's eyes widened, her face full of disbelief. Isn't he the strongest powerhouse of the Noah continent? Even he was defeated? The strongest powerhouses of the Noah continent are only powerhouses of the divine realm. Utaris, on the other hand, is a true god from another plane. Hill's expression was somewhat dejected. Perhaps Platz's choice was right. The Noah continent has turned a new page. It is no longer the era we are familiar with. This time, all the powerhouses of the divine realm were hanged. It was the dawn of a new era, comparable to the birth of the Noah continent. This was the era of Utaris, the era of the Red Silk Army. At this time, Linner softly exclaimed, "Grandfather, isn't that Klein? He is one of Utaris' subordinates. How could he be tied up and hanged?" "What? Impossible." Hill was shocked. He focused his eyes and saw Klein on one of the high platforms. He was tied together with the people of the Calamity Church. It seemed that he was about to be hanged as well. Even in seclusion, the organization secretly cultivated by the King of Assassins did not stop operating. Every movement of the entire Noah continent could not escape his grasp. It was just that he did not have the ability to change it. It really is Klein. Utaris wants to execute him. It seems that he offended Utaris. I just don't know what happened. Hill shook his head. A secret of this level was not something that a powerhouse of the sacred domain like him could inquire about. Utaris sat in his seat, his calm face full of dignity. His gaze fell on the tied-up Klein, and a trace of disgust flashed in his eyes. "Useless thing, it's better if he dies." Needless to say, the order to execute Klein came from Utaris. The reason was very simple. He could not find the key. To Utaris, nothing was important except for the key. Of course, there was a more important reason why he wanted to kill Klein, and that was that Klein had personally rescued him from Bartlow's prison after being imprisoned for 100,000 years. The proud and arrogant Utaris not only did not feel grateful, but instead felt that it was a disgrace. Naturally, the fewer people who knew about this, the better. Therefore, he found an excuse to deal with Klein. At this moment, in addition to being tied up like a rice dumpling, Klein's mouth was stuffed with a rag, making him unable to speak. The smart Klein naturally understood Utaris' intentions. He glared at him as if he wanted to spit fire. At this moment, he finally understood that even if he found the key, his fate would be the same. At this moment, his heart was filled with regret. Why did he lose his mind and release Utaris, this beast? The iron-armored ape Apps stood beside Utaris. After Klein was captured, he replaced Klein's position. He looked at the master in front of him, whom he had followed for a long time, and his heart felt like it was being stabbed by a knife. He knelt down with a thud. "Lord Utaris, although Master can't find the key you mentioned, he's already done his best. Please give him a chance." "Apps, you don't have to say any more." Utaris waved his hand and pretended to be magnanimous. "The army has its rules. If we can't complete the mission and report, then we don't have to do anything. This brat is holding me up. He deserves to die." After saying the word "deserve to die," a murderous intent flashed in Utaris' eyes. App's face turned pale. But Master once saved my lord this. What did you say?" Utaris' face turned cold. He turned around and looked at Apps coldly. He slowly stood up and walked closer to Apps step by step. He asked in a deep voice, "Even you want to betray me? Is that it?" "No, my lord." Apps panicked. He waved his hand desperately, but what greeted him was Utaris' fist. With a thud, App's head exploded like a watermelon. His body fell limply and stopped moving. "Apps!" Klein, who had been staring at Utaris, naturally saw this scene. His eyes were about to pop out of their sockets, but he couldn't shout anything. He could only struggle with all his might. Woo-woo. He couldn't speak. At this moment, Utaris' cold gaze shot towards him. With a boom, Klein's mind went blank. Then, he felt a large amount of flames coming out of his body. He wants to do it himself. By the time Klein realized this, it was already too late. At that moment, he had already turned into a flaming man. He couldn't even make a sound. Amidst the raging flames, Klein was filled with indignation, hatred, and regret. His entire being, including his body and soul, was reduced to ashes. Hiss. Everyone in the square sucked in a breath of cold air. They looked at Utaris with eyes full of fear, including the people of the Red Silk Army. Although these people knew that Utaris was powerful, they were not familiar with him. Besides fear, there was nothing else in their eyes. The members of the Red Silk Army lowered their heads, not daring to look at Utaris's murderous gaze. Utaris smiled. His strong methods had finally taken effect. These people were not the brothers of the Red Silk Army from 100,000 years ago. Only by using ruthless methods could they be intimidated. Execute. At this moment, Utaris sneered. Yes, my lord. The executioners trembled. They untied the rope on the gallows and tied it over the criminal's head. Saya, are you afraid? Isis asked in a trembling voice. The two children were placed on the gallows, which attracted many sympathetic gazes. Many people knew that they were Ron's children. I'm not afraid. Saya proudly puffed out her small chest. Her childish expression had a trace of determination, which made people feel even more heartache. I don't want to watch. Lynn gritted her teeth and lowered her head. Her beautiful big eyes were full of tears. Boom! At this time, the calm sky seemed to have been torn apart. Next, countless black dots fell from the sky like raindrops. These black spots turned into countless undead creatures. Terranites, abominations, zombies, skeleton kings, gargoyles, and a large number of undead creatures. As soon as these undead creatures fell to the ground, they kept roaring, and their momentum shook the whole city. Undead. It's the undead. Run. The onlookers panicked and scattered. Even the Red Silk Army couldn't control the chaotic crowd. It's Ron. I feel his breath. Well, Merlin shouted in surprise. His hands were tied behind his back, and he stood up in a daze. Ron. When the people of the Scourge Church heard this, they were surprised and happy. Several women had already sobbed in a low voice. It's Dad. It's really Dad. Dad has come to save us. Isis shouted excitedly. Saya's small eyes were full of hope. Is it that Ron? Isn't he dead? Did he come back to life? Eudaly sneered. Even if he came back to life, so what? He could kill him again. How could the gap between a god and a god be made up in a few days? Eudaly. A voice came from the sky. His voice was majestic and confident. It spread far and wide. Your death has come. A familiar figure appeared in the space passage in the sky. It was Ron. He stood in the sky and slowly descended. Different from before, Ron's face was wearing a terrifying skull mask. Eudaly, who didn't think much of it, couldn't help but narrow his eyes when he saw Ron's mask. Lich King. Chapter 840. No, he's not the Lich King, he's Ron. Feeling the familiar soul wave, Eutalis's wildly beating heart quickly calmed down. If it really was the Lich King, he would have no choice but to escape. This guy actually condensed a divine spark. Looking at Ron in the sky, Eutalis's heart was filled with jealousy and hatred. Damn it, what happened to him the past few days? Could it be that he obtained the Lich King's inheritance? Eutalis's eyes widened, and such a thought involuntarily flashed through his mind. Yes, it must be. They are both undead, and the Lich King's divine spark of death is very compatible with Ron. That means the key to the lost world is in Ron's hands? Thinking of this, Eudaly was not shocked, but rather happy and laughed loudly. God, Ron actually became a god. That's great. We're saved. Frigga's eyes were filled with tears of joy. However, Homelin was even more excited. After 100,000 years, he was finally able to see his mentor, the Lich King, again. This ferocious and terrifying skull mask was too familiar, and Homelin could not help but cry. The undead army that descended from the sky was not idle either. They madly rushed towards the soldiers of the Red Silk Army, and some even fought with the divine magical beasts. The entire city was in chaos. Ron, who had fused with the divine spark of death, was many times stronger than before. The undead creatures he summoned were also much stronger. The soldiers of the Red Silk Army were no match for him, and they all retreated. The entire city was in chaos. Soon, the divine magical beasts of the Red Silk Army were either dead or running away. Those who did not have the strength of a divine realm had long since run away. The temporary gallows that had been erected also collapsed, and everyone was rescued. In an inconspicuous corner in the northwest of the city, two black figures slowly appeared. They were the king of assassins, Hill, and his granddaughter, Lynn. When the battle was about to begin, Hill had already dragged Lynn to the side to avoid being affected. Lynn said in shock, "Grandpa, is that Ron? Didn't you say that he was already dead?" "He's indeed Ron." Hill hesitated for a moment. According to reliable information, Ron was killed by the Sky Dragon long ago. As for why he came back to life, I don't know. Linner muttered. He seems to be even stronger than before. Maybe, at their level of strength, we can't tell who's strong and who's weak. Hill said with a sigh. The situation was one-sided. Soon, the entire city was occupied by the undead army, leaving only the small place where Utaris stood. It was surrounded by countless undead. In the sky, hundreds of frost dragons were roaring, and on the ground, the undead army was densely packed. These undead unanimously targeted Utaris, waiting for Ron to give the order to attack. However, Utaris stood there unruffled and sneered. Looking at the other party's greedy and slightly disdainful smile, Ron felt uncomfortable and said coldly, "What are you laughing at?" "I'm laughing at you for overestimating yourself," Utaris said with a smile. "By the way, I have to thank you for bringing me something I've always been looking for but couldn't find. By the way, the key to the lost continent in Hermes' hands is with you, right?" "It's with me." Ron nodded, rarely admitting it. "Thank you for your honesty. You taking the initiative to admit it saved me a lot of effort." Utaris laughed, and his face suddenly became incomparably ferocious. "Ron, I admit that you are very powerful. At such a young age, you actually cultivated to the strength of the realm of gods, and you also obtained that guy's inheritance and fused with the godhood. However, if you think that you can defeat me with just this, then you are gravely mistaken. Utaris, already had the godhood 100,000 years ago. Compare to me. You are still too far away. That key, hand it over." With that, Utaris roared and suddenly transformed into a huge sky dragon true body, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws, ferocious and terrifying. Spatial fall. As soon as Utaris attacked, he used his most powerful skill. In the space formed by his divine power, countless spatial spheres appeared out of thin air and bombarded Ron. For a moment, the earth quaked and the mountains swayed. An extremely vacuum formed around Utaris, and no living creatures were allowed to exist in this area. Ron. As soon as Utaris attacked, it was earth-shattering. For a moment, everyone's hearts were in their throats, and they couldn't help but shout. Ron couldn't lose. He also understood that he couldn't lose. Too many people's hopes were concentrated on him. The survival of the Scourged Church, the hopes of his family, the lives of his brothers, and a mission entrusted to him by the Lich King. There were too many factors, and he couldn't lose. Once he lost, there would be no hope of reprieve. "I won't lose, because I am—" Ron took a deep breath and calmed down. His mind was clear, and the death godhood above his sea of consciousness that wrapped around his soul began to frantically revolve. Then his eyes opened, and they shone brightly. Lich King, Death Withering. As soon as Ron attacked, he used the famous ultimate skill of Lich King Hermes. Countless black auras immediately surged between heaven and earth. These black auras with strong corrosiveness crazily condensed and wrapped around Utaris with him as the center. Boom! This was the collision of the two divine forces. Thousands of rays of light erupted, and the city beneath Utaris's feet was instantly reduced to ruins. The force produced by the collision of the two divine forces continued to spread outwards, and the people who were still alive fled in all directions without regard for their lives. "Get down!" Saya and Isis ran a bit slower. Saya was sharp-eyed and nimble, and he immediately pushed his sister down and pressed her under his body. Soon, powerful divine powers engulfed them. "Saya!" Kadena cried out heartbreakingly, but Hamelin pulled her away and desperately fled. "There's no time, let's go." Saya lay in a deep pit and desperately raised the power of the halo to resist. He only felt a piercing pain and soon lost consciousness. The confrontation between the divine powers of death and divine powers of space continued, and both sides used their strongest power. Ron's 6 huge wings spread out, and his hair stood up. Ron's hair spread out and fluttered in the air. Wearing the Lich King's mask, he looked ferocious like a god of war. This guy's power has actually become so much stronger. Utaris gnashed his teeth as he thought, and his blood-red eyes stared at Ron. Utaris didn't know if it was an illusion, but he saw a huge shadow appear behind Ron. This shadow was wearing heavy undead armor and didn't wear a mask, revealing a skeleton-like face that was coldly staring at him. "Whoa, Lich King?" Utaris was shocked. One must know that 100,000 years ago, the person he feared the most was the Lich King. He suddenly panicked, and his power began to collapse. At this time, Ron pushed the power of death and decay to the peak. Not good. When Utaris realized that what he saw was an illusion, it was already too late. The surging corrosive power instantly swallowed him. The powerful sky dragon began to collapse. Under the power of death and decay, no creature could survive. Impossible. How could I lose to this kid? I'm the sky dragon. I'm the leader of the Red Silk Army. I'm the overlord of the main plane. Impossible. Utaris was almost mad with anger. He desperately struggled and roared, but it was all in vain. His hands, feet, body, and soul were all corroded and completely disappeared from this world. Finally, it's over. Looking at the ruined city, Ron sighed in his heart. Utaris was dead, the Red Silk Army was destroyed, but the pain that the war left on the Noah continent could never be erased. Lord Noah was dead, and the Noah continent lost a powerful guardian. Now, Ron hated war more than ever, but war was unavoidable. He finally understood why the Sky Dragon from Bartlow's prison would descend on the small secondary plane of the Noah continent. It was all because of the key to the Lost Continent. Ron calmly looked at the soul ring in his hand, and his heart was filled with regret. What secret was this small ring hiding? Ron was thinking, but at this time, a mournful cry broke his train of thought. "Saya! Saya! Don't die, don't die!" Ron looked down and saw his daughter, Isis, crying and desperately shaking the little boy beside her. But the little boy didn't have any reaction. Ron's heart skipped a beat, and he flew down. "F.A. Father." When Isis saw Ron, she took a step back, and tears still hung on her face. Ron carefully examined Saya's injuries and said indifferently, "It's okay, he won't die yet." After saying that, a powerful death divine power was quickly injected into Saya, and after a while, Saya faintly woke up. He looked at the masked man in front of him, and was so shocked that he couldn't speak. "You are Saya? Kadena's son?" Ron smiled, stretched out his hand, and gently touched his head. "Not bad, you are quite strong." The first meeting between little Saya and his father, Ron, ended so simply, but Saya would never forget this scene for the rest of his life. In the next few days, Ron was busy. He had to reorganize the Scourge Church and integrate the humans, orcs, elves, magical beasts, and other forces under the banner of the Scourge Church. The invasion of the Red Silk Army made him realize that although the Noah continent was very big, The various races and forces were like a sheet of loose sand and didn't belong to one another. Only by integrating all of them and twisting them into a rope could he gather the most powerful force. Ron thought that things would be very complicated, but it turned out to be very smooth. All the forces surrendered, and even the most powerful dragons of the Noah continent lowered their noble heads. The reason was very simple. First, it was because Ron had saved the continent many times, and second, it was because Ron's strength was far beyond everyone's, and he became the guardian of the Noah continent. Someone proposed to change the Noah continent to Ron continent, but Ron vetoed it. The Noah continent could only belong to Noah, and he wanted to remember this name forever. After everything was settled, Ron took his wives back to Undercity. After a short reunion, he began to think about the main plane. The main plane? How can I go to the main plane? Ron thought about it for several days until his head hurt, but he still couldn't think of any clues. Although he promised the Lich King to protect the undead in the main plane, he couldn't go to the main plane, so it was useless to say anything. At this moment, a guard of the Scourge Church hurriedly ran in. "Sir Guardian, there's a guest outside who wants to see you." "Guest? Who is it?" Ron froze. She didn't say her name. She only said, "She's your friend." The guard said hesitantly, "Friend?" Ron straightened up in his chair and frowned for a long time, but he couldn't remember who it was. He nodded gently. "Let her in." Chapter 841. A crow flew past the ruins of the Undercity and landed on a small balcony in the middle of the city. At this time, the crow emitted a black fog that slowly turned into a human figure. "Stop, who are you?" The guards of the Undercity tensed up. They gripped their weapons tightly and pointed their sharp spears at the uninvited guest. This uninvited guest was a woman, a necromancer. She was wearing a black robe that symbolized necromancers. The robe almost reached the ground, wrapping her body tightly. A hood hung from the back of her neck and covered her face. "I want to see Ron," the woman said calmly. She raised her head slightly, revealing an unusually pale face. "Ron." When the woman spoke, all the guards were shocked. One of them asked boldly, "Are you Ron's friend?" A petite figure appeared in the dim corridor leading to the Hall of the Dead. She slowly walked into the hall. "You are." Ron's gaze paused for a moment. He suddenly saw the figure. It seemed familiar, but he couldn't remember. Ron, we haven't seen each other for a while. You actually forgot about me." A bell-like voice giggled. The newcomer slowly took off her hood, revealing a pale and delicate face. "Nicole?" Ron saw her and was surprised and happy. He jumped up from his seat. "Why are you here?" The newcomer was a necromancer. To be precise, she was a necromancer like Klein. She was none other than the young girl Ron met during a plane mission in the Shualon continent, Nicole. Although her strength was average, her generosity left a deep impression on Ron. However, in the end, this strange necromancer girl mysteriously disappeared in the death ruins. She didn't even pay Ron his reward, which made him depressed for a long time. Now that he saw her, Ron was naturally angry. He rolled his eyes and stretched out his hand. "Give it to me?" Meeting an old friend should be a surprise, but Ron looked like he was asking for a debt. Nicole was stunned. "Give what?" "The reward." Ron snorted coldly and said, "You said that you would pay me 800 black crystal coins if I escort you to the land of death, but you ran away after we got there. Now that I've run into you, who else should I ask if not you?" To be honest, Ron was quite concerned about these black crystal coins. At least, he had never seen so much money before. He was no longer the ignorant fool he used to be. He knew that the black crystal coins contained some kind of strange nomological power. This nomological power was called the Origin Energy and could help people advance in strength. When Ron advanced to the Sanctuary Realm, he only used 5 black crystal coins. If he had brought back 800 black crystal coins at that time, he would have been able to help many people in the Calamity Army advance to the Sanctuary Realm. "Oh, so that's what you're talking about. I almost forgot about it, if you didn't mention it." Nicole thought about it for a long time before she remembered. She immediately giggled. "I don't have it." Unexpectedly, Nicole spread out her hands and made a helpless gesture. Ron was dumbfounded. His left hand stopped in midair. You don't have it? Are you lying to me? Aren't you supposed to be quite rich? You can easily take out a few thousand black crystal coins. I used to be, but I don't anymore. Nicole curled her lips and showed an indifferent expression. Think about it. I'm a master-level expert. I have to escape the pursuit of the undead and go to various material planes to look for my father. I have to hire servants, right? Buy medicine, right? Eat, right? Fight, right? My father once left me a few million black crystal coins, but I spent them all. Ron was speechless. Sigh. Ron sat on the chair in frustration. He was slightly disappointed, but when he remembered that she was the Lich King's daughter and that he had received the Lich King's inheritance, he didn't bicker with her. He blinked and asked, "Oh, right. Why did you come to the Noah continent? What business do you have with me?" At the mention of this, Nicole's expression became serious. She stared at Ron without blinking. I heard you received my father's divine inheritance and became the new Lich King. Only then did Ron remember her identity. Nicole was the Lich King's daughter, Hermes. She had wandered through many planes in order to find her father's whereabouts. Yes, Ron didn't want to hide it from her. I did indeed receive Lord Hermes' divine inheritance and used this powerful force to defeat Utaris. Nicole's eyes reddened and a trace of sadness flashed through her expression. At this moment, she knelt down. Respected Lich King, the undead from the main plane pay their respects to you. Nicole. This time, it was Ron's turn to be dumbfounded. He stood there, not knowing what to do. Nicole raised her head, her pale face solemn. Although I don't know how you received my father's favor, you have indeed received his divine inheritance. The current you is the new Lich King, the leader of the Scourge army, and the king of all undead. Perhaps I am. A bitter smile appeared at the corners of Ron's mouth. I've accepted Lord Heramo's divine core legacy, and naturally, I've been given a new mission. I'm to become the Lich King and protect the billions of undead in the main plane on his behalf. Nicole nodded. That's right. You received my father's inheritance, so you naturally have to bear the responsibility you should bear. The greater the power, the greater the responsibility. Ron sighed silently. Nicole, you don't blame me? Why would I blame you? Blame you for receiving my father's inheritance? Nicole shook her head sadly and said with a smile, My father has his reasons for choosing you. He believes that you can fulfill your promise to him. I just can't believe that he's really dead after searching for so long in all the major planes. The two of them sighed silently and sat in their seats. There were tears in Nicole's eyes. Ron, what do you plan to do next? Nicole asked softly as she wiped the tears from her face. I don't know. A bitter smile flashed across the corner of Ron's mouth. He shook his head and said, I don't have a clue right now. I've never been to the main plane. I don't know anything about the situation there. Besides, I don't even know how to get to the main plane. It's not difficult to get to the main plane. I can help you with that. Nicole's expression became serious, and she sighed. This is a problem that can be solved with a planar teleportation scroll, although I don't have much left. But what about after you get to the main plane? You're just one person. How are you going to rebuild the Scourge army? That's too difficult. With my strength, I can't help you. You don't have to worry about that. You just have to help me get to the main plane. Ron's spirits were lifted when he heard this. He said proudly, as long as I get to the main plane, all problems will be solved. I'm now stronger than I've ever been. Nicole stared at Ron in shock for a long while before she started to giggle. Her bell-like laughter echoed in the Hall of the Dead. Ron, you don't think that. With your strength, you can sweep across the main plane and destroy anyone who disagrees with you. Then, you can raise the Scourge Army's banner and make all the undead submit to you? Isn't that the case? Ron asked in a daze. He looked a little silly. Naturally, that was what he planned in his heart. Ron had never worried about the Lich King's promise. Now that he had obtained the inheritance of Hermes, his strength had increased to the peak. He could even defeat Utaris, so what was there to worry about? It would just take a little effort. When he was weak, there were some things that he didn't even dare to think about. Now that he was strong, what was there that he couldn't do? It was no wonder that Ron was so confident. He now had a divine personality and was a true god. Ouch, I can't take it anymore. My stomach hurts from laughing. In front of Ron, the Lich King, Nicole wasn't as reserved as she was in front of her father. She rubbed her stomach, which was hurting from laughing, and held back her laughter as she spoke. You're thinking too simply. There are many strong people in the main plane. Although you've obtained the inheritance of my father's strength, do you think you can sweep through everything with just this strength? Nicole said excitedly. Ron, not to mention the Archangel of the Legion of Holy Angels, Michael, who is at the peak of his power in the main plane, even the Legion leader of the Burning Legion, Thor of the Demon Alliance, who came from hell. They're all as strong as my father. There are countless such people in the main plane. Do you really think that with your current strength, you could do whatever you want in the main plane? Nicole shook her head. Ron, I can only say that you're too naive. Moreover, although you've obtained my father's divine personality, your strength is still far from my father's. Not to mention the people I just mentioned, you can't even defeat the leaders of the main battle legions. Utaris, who you defeated, is just a small character in the eyes of the true strong people in the main plane. Ron realized that he had indeed thought too simply. Why did the Lich King fall? Naturally, it was related to the strong people in the main plane. Perhaps it was the Archangel of the Legion of Holy Angels, Michael. Even the powerful Scourge was defeated. So how could the Lich King's enemy be simple? From Nicole's tone, if Ron went to the main plane now, not to mention protecting the undead and restoring the glory of the Scourge, it would be difficult for him to even establish a foothold in the main plane. Then what should we do? Ron stared blankly for a long time before asking. At this moment, an idea flashed through his mind, and he slapped his thigh. Right? Nicole, I almost forgot. Don't you have the Scourge staff? The Scourge staff. Chapter 842. Why? Is there a problem? Ron asked in return. Nicole was absent-minded for a while before she said, I know what you're thinking. You must be thinking that you've obtained my father's legacy and the Calamity God staff. You'll be able to command millions of undead when you appear as his successor. Isn't that the case? Ron's old face reddened, as if she had seen through his thoughts. In fact, that was exactly what he was thinking. Actually, you're not wrong to think that way. The Calamity God staff is the symbol of the Calamity Army. With it, you'll have the entire Calamity Army and command millions of undead. But, Nicole sighed and looked at Ron with some regret. If you had appeared not long after my father had fallen, then it would have been possible. But now 100,000 years have passed. It's too late. Perhaps those undead have already forgotten about my father. Is that so? Ron's gaze dimmed, and the glimmer of hope that had just risen in his heart was also extinguished. 100,000 years had passed, and the undead had most likely already forgotten about Hermes. If someone suddenly took out a weapon and demanded that everyone listen to his orders, it would be strange if they listened. Even if it was Lord Noah, whom Ron respected, if someone took out Noah's sword and demanded that Ron listen to his orders 100,000 years later, Ron would have no other choice but to treat that person as a fool. Nicole glanced at Ron and said hesitantly, Actually, at present, it might not be a good thing that the Calamity God staff is in your hands. Do you still remember the group of people who chased after me in the Shualon continent? It's that undead called Gibbon, right? I remember, Ron muttered. He recalled that Nicole had been chased by a group of undead in the Shualon continent, and their goal had been the Calamity God staff. Yes, Nicole nodded. They're from the Plague Army. Plague Army? Ron was stunned for a moment. What's that? It's also one of the main armies of the undead. To be exact, their commander is under Gibbon's father, Dreadlord Saruman. Saruman was my father's subordinate 100,000 years ago, and the Plague Army was also a part of the Calamity Army. After my father disappeared, the Plague Army broke away from the Calamity Army and became its own unit. Nicole teally explained some of the grievances regarding the undead in the main plane. This guy called Saruman is very strong. At least, he's not any weaker than my father. After my father went missing, He set his sights on the Scourge Staff. He planned to use the Scourge Staff as a token to command billions of undead and swallow the entire Scourge army. I see. Ron listened carefully and finally understood. He sighed and said, "It seems it's not safe for me to hold onto the Calamity God Staff. I'm afraid that once I reach the main plane and he finds out that I have this thing, he'll kill me and snatch the Calamity God Staff away." Ron thought to himself, how big was the difference in strength between him and Dreadlord Saruman? Even if Saruman was weak, he still had the Plague Army, while he was alone in the main plane. The difference in strength, for a moment, Ron's mind was in a mess. He thought that this mission was not so easy to complete. Otherwise, the Lich King could have just given his power to anyone. That's right. This is only one side that wants to steal the Calamity God Staff. To you, the other side is more dangerous, Nicole said. What? There's more? Ron was shocked. It seemed that he had more than one enemy in the main plane of the undead. If he really wandered around the main plane of the undead with the Calamity God Staff, it would be strange if he didn't get killed in minutes. The other side is the Calamity God Emperor Fismai. After my father disappeared, this guy called Fismai took over the majority of the Calamity Army. He calls himself the Calamity God Emperor, but he hasn't been able to take out the Calamity God Staff, so his inheritance is a little problematic. Many undead don't care about him. Of course, the strength of this Calamity Army is far inferior to the Calamity Army from before. This is the Calamity Army that Klein was talking about. Ron muttered. He'd heard from Klein that there was still a Calamity Army in the main plane of the undead. It was just that this Calamity Army wasn't worthy of his loyalty. As for the reason, Klein didn't say. Of course, these two forces aren't the only ones who want the Calamity God Staff. Other forces also want the Calamity God Staff. They want to support a representative and control the entire undead race. For example, the demon clan you met in the Shu'alan continent, and even the angel clan of the Righteous Alliance. They all want it. Nicole took a deep breath and said, for the past 100,000 years, she had put in a lot of effort to protect the Calamity God Staff. Not only did she have to hide, but she also had to search for the whereabouts of her father, the Lich King. If the Lich King hadn't left her millions of black crystal coins to buy many life-saving items, she probably wouldn't be alive now. Her strength was too weak. After listening to Nicole's explanation of the situation in the main plane of the undead, even Ron felt troubled. It was already good enough that he could stay alive in the main plane. As for restoring the glory of the Calamity Army and protecting millions of undead, he didn't even need to think about it. Do you have any good ideas? Ron asked with a frown. He was at his wits' end with the current situation. It wasn't something he could solve. I don't know. Father's order was to hand over the Calamity God Staff to the true successor, and I've already completed my mission. Nicole shook her head, a trace of confusion flashing in her eyes. She had made it very clear that her mission had already been completed. All that was left was the matter of Ron, the successor. I haven't been back to the main plane of the undead for a long time. Besides, with my strength, I'm afraid I can't help you much, Nicole said softly. Ron stood up and paced back and forth in the hall of the undead. His brows were tightly knitted, and his expression was grave. At this moment, Ron stopped in his tracks. That Calamity God Staff. Can I take a look at it? Sure. Nicole wasn't surprised. She raised her head and took out an exquisite necklace from her neck. Then, she placed her hands on the necklace and softly chanted an incantation. Not long after, the space lock on the necklace was opened. Nicole solemnly took out an item and handed it to Ron with both hands. This is the Calamity God Staff? In the Hall of the Undead, Ron quietly stroked a bone staff that was as smooth as white jade as he sighed and asked. The Calamity God Staff in Ron's hand was a strangely shaped bone staff. Its entire body was sparkling and translucent, and it was about 4 meters long. The body of the staff was very smooth, and it had the bony feeling that Ron was most familiar with. However, it was also abnormally heavy, much heavier than a fine steel sword. At the top of the bone staff was a huge skull with empty eye sockets and sharp teeth. It looked very sinister. Below the huge skull was a row of smaller skulls. There were a total of 8 skulls, and they were respectively facing east, south, west, north, southeast, northeast, southwest, and northwest. Below the skulls in these 8 directions hung a string of beads. These small beads were even smaller skulls. Ron counted them carefully and found that there were exactly 13 of them in each string. 13-foot was an unlucky number in the minds of the people. It represented death, and this was a meaning that the undead liked. Yes, this is the Calamity God's staff. Nicole nodded and answered. She hesitated for a moment before saying softly, "It belongs to you now. Can I use it now?" Ron loved the Calamity God staff so much that he could not bear to part with it. This weapon gave him a different feeling, as if it was connected to his bloodline. When Ron held it in his hands, he could clearly feel the joy that the Calamity God staff emitted, as if it was a close comrade that had not seen each other for a long time. "Of course, this is your right." Nicole shrugged her shoulders and then reminded him softly, "But please take note, its power. It can increase your strength by at least 30%. I'm afraid that you'll destroy this place." "I have my own points." Ron nodded and softly chanted a few incantations. In an instant, the entire hall of the undead fell silent. Traces of a strange and terrifying aura seeped out and spread in all directions. The sun in the sky seemed to have lost its light, falling like a morning star. The earth fell into boundless darkness. What's going on? What's going on? Why did the sky turn dark? What a terrifying, suffocating power. The originally sunny and beautiful weather suddenly turned dark, but it was not completely dark. Instead, there was a sense of death and desolation. The people in the Undercity were in chaos, and panic was spreading. "What's going on?" Vivian, who was discussing matters with Great Elder Homelin, stood up and said in surprise, "What a powerful aura of death." This is coming from Ron's room. Homelin's expression was serious. "Divine weapon. I can feel the aura of a divine weapon. Let's go. Let's take a look." Homelin and Vivian exchanged glances and ran towards the Hall of the Undead at the same time. Kakik. In the Hall of the Undead, Ron held the Calamity God's scepter in his hand. The huge skull at the top seemed to be alive. The 2 empty eye sockets emitted a strange green light, and the small skull below started to spin like a top. The 8 strings of 13 pearls spun together, and the crisp sound of bones knocking could be heard. At this moment, Ron's body was already in the air, like a demon descending from the sky. With a swoosh, he waved the scepter, and a strange black chain flew out of his hand. It passed through the door of the Hall of the Undead, penetrated the spacious balcony, and crashed into a small mountain more than 15 kilometers away from the Undercity. Boom! The earth shook and the mountain shook. The Hall of the Undead and the Undercity also felt the strong tremors. "That's ridiculous." Ron was stunned. He did not use much strength, but he caused such a huge destruction. Nicole said that the divine weapon had the effect of increasing strength. She was right. You still don't know how to control the power of the Calamity God scepter. If this divine weapon was in my father's hands, it would only be more powerful. Chapter 843. Just then, the door of the Hall of the Dead was pushed open. Homelin, Vivian, Shea, Kadena, Aurora, and a large group of people rushed in. When they saw Nicole, they were all very surprised. Among these people, Shea knew Nicole. She only faintly nodded, which could be considered as a greeting. Ron told everyone about Nicole and the matter going to the main plane. For a moment, the entire Hall of the Dead was in an uproar. Aurora, the dark elf, was the first to speak. "Ron, every time you go out on a mission, I'm always on tenterhooks. This time, no matter what, I won't let you take the risk alone. I want to go too. I want to go too. Take me." Everyone suddenly clamored. Even the youngest, Saya, waved her little fist and said that she wanted to go to the main plane with her father. Ron was both touched and speechless. They really thought that he had gone on a trip. Even if his strength was already that of God, he was not the only god in the main plane. There were countless people who were stronger than him. These people thought too simply. However, he had no choice. These people were either Ron's wives, teachers, or friends. No one could refuse. Ron could only look at Nicole. Nicole shrugged. Don't look at me. I only have 3 plain teleportation scrolls. Other than you and me, there can only be one more person. I think Sister Shea is a good choice. Nicole took the opportunity to speak up and gave Shea a look. Among these people, she only knew Shea. Although Shea had been hiding in the back silently, Nicole had already seen through her. She also wanted to go. Shea looked at Nicole gratefully. She took a few steps forward, the heavy armor on her body making a clattering sound. Then she said in a deep voice, Sir Lich King, Shea is willing to follow you to the main plane. I swear to protect you with my life. Ron was silent for a moment and agreed. First, Shea was a Death Knight and could protect him in close combat. Second, Shea was also his guardian knight. Their souls were connected, just like a summoned creature. There was no need to speak. They could communicate directly through their souls. Ron had already made his decision. Although everyone was a little helpless, they could only accept it. Although Homelin was very strong, he was the great elder. He still had to stay and look after the Scourge Church. The matter was settled. 3 days later, under the reluctant gazes of the people of the Scourge Church, they disappeared into the boundless void. Isis, do you think Father and Teacher Shea will come back? Little Saya looked at the 3 people disappearing, his eyes full of reluctance. Everyone has his own mission. Isis, who was only a few years older than Saya, slowly withdrew her gaze and smiled. We also have. Yes, we must become stronger so that we can help Father. Saya raised a small fist and said firmly. The mountains shrouded in black fog stretched as far as the eye could see. The sky was gray, and the sun could not be seen all day long. However, it did not seem too dark, as if it was the scenery after evening and before night fell. On some of the ground where the soil had hardened, some low, black plants grew. They looked like grass, but they did not seem to be. In the distant forest, there were patches of black shadows that swayed gently, looking very strange. Bang, bang, bang. Dazzling light flashed, and 3 figures flashed out of the circle of light. This is the main plane of the undead. Standing on a hill, with his feet on the land of the main plane of the undead, Ron looked into the distance and asked, Yes, we have come to the main plane of the undead, Nicole replied. She gently sniffed her small nose. But I don't know where exactly we are, because the planar transmission scroll doesn't have a fixed location. The planar transmission scroll could transmit people across planes, but if there were no coordinates, it would only transmit them to any place in the main plane. Fortunately, it wouldn't transmit them to a group of strange beasts. The slight breeze carried a rotten smell, but Ron felt very comfortable. Everything here seemed to fit him perfectly. Even his soul was crying out happily with his breathing. In short, Ron felt that he belonged here. It was no wonder that all intelligent beings who cultivated the power of the soul yearned for the main plane of the undead. This was indeed a paradise for the undead. Compared to Ron, Shaya's reaction was more direct. She took in large mouthfuls of the turbid and decaying space of the main plane of the undead. After a long time, she opened her eyes. I feel that my soul power has increased a little. This is the smell of rotting corpses. Nicole pointed to the hardened soil on the ground and explained, This smell is emitted by the green liquid seeping out of the soil. It can strengthen the soul. Seeing the hardened soil, it means that there must be an undead village nearby, or a small town. So that's how it is. Ron nodded. Shea closed her eyes again and breathed in the decaying air with all her might. She looked like she was enjoying it very much. Caw, caw, caw. A small crow flew back from the sky and landed on Nicole's palm. It turned into a cloud of black fog and disappeared. Nicole's face was filled with joy. As expected, there is an undead town about 10 kilometers ahead. Let's go there and ask. All right. Ron nodded and didn't express any objection. Wait. At this moment, a voice called out to the two of them. Ron turned around and saw Shea standing there in a daze with a bitter expression. What's wrong? Are you feeling unwell somewhere? Ron hurried over and asked with concern. It's not that. Shea shook her head and stammered. I think I broke through. Ron, Shea's strength was already at the peak of the sacred domain. She was only a hair's breadth away from breaking through to the divine realm. Of course, this required an opportunity. He didn't expect that Shea would break through the sacred domain shortly after arriving at the main plane of the undead, directly advancing to the divine realm. Netherworld Knight, the most powerful death knight of the undead. This was the title bestowed upon Shea. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.